Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I rented a small cabin out in the woods, about an hour's drive from town. It was supposed to be a weekend away from everything. Work had been too much lately, and I needed time to clear my head. The idea of being alone out there, with nothing but trees and quiet, sounded perfect. The cabin wasn't anything special. Just one room, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. It had a porch out front with an old wooden chair and a view that stretched out over the thick woods. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, and just an old radio that barely picked up any stations. I figured that's why I needed no distractions, just a break from everything. I got there in the late afternoon. The sun was just starting to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. It was peaceful at first. I unpacked my bag, set up a small fire outside, and cooked some canned soup for dinner. By the time the sun disappeared completely, the silence was almost too much. I wasn't used to it, not after living in the city for so long. I spent most of that night sitting on the porch, staring out into the woods. It was darker than I expected, like a wall of blackness just beyond the tree line. You couldn't see anything past it. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Every so often, I thought I heard something else, like footsteps. But I chalked it up to animals moving around. It's the woods, after all. There's bound to be wildlife. I went to bed around midnight, but it wasn't easy to fall asleep. The bed was old and creaky, and every little noise outside kept me on edge. I was sure I'd heard something walking near the cabin, but I told myself it was just my nerves, just the usual noises of the forest. Eventually, I drifted off, though not deeply. A loud thud woke me up. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. It sounded like something had hit the side of the cabin. I stayed still, listening. At first, there was nothing. But then, I heard it again, a soft crunch of leaves, this time closer to the window. I got out of bed slowly, trying to stay quiet. I walked over to the window, the one that looked out toward the front porch. I peeked through the curtain, but I couldn't see anything. Just the dark shapes of trees against the night sky. No movement, no one standing there. I stood there for a while, waiting. The only sound was my own breathing. I was about to step away when I heard it again, louder this time, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the gravel just outside the door. My heart was racing. I knew it wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate. Whoever it was, they were walking around the cabin. Slowly. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and turned it on, but I didn't open the door. Instead, I waited, hoping that whoever it was would leave. But the footsteps didn't stop. They moved to the back of the cabin, then to the side, like someone was circling the place. I tried to tell myself it was just a lost hiker, maybe someone looking for help. But why not call out? Why just keep walking around like that? After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped. I stood there in the dark, flashlight in hand, barely breathing. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make any noise. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, just waiting for something to happen. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see if anyone was out there. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch, shining the flashlight around. The light barely reached past the edge of the porch, and everything beyond it was pitch black. I didn't see anyone. No movement, no sign that anyone had been there. But I knew what I heard. I checked around the cabin, even walked a few steps into the woods, shining the flashlight into the trees. Still, nothing. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was an animal after all. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night, just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any noise. Nothing else happened, though, and when morning came, I felt a little stupid. I convinced myself I'd overreacted. I spent most of the next day hiking around the area, trying to clear my head. It helped a little, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me from the trees. But every time I turned around, it was just the woods. By the time I got back to the cabin, it was already late afternoon. I built another fire, ate some more canned food, and tried to relax. But that night, it started again. I was sitting on the porch when I heard footsteps, just like before. Slow, deliberate. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the sound, but I didn't see anything. The footsteps stopped when the light hit the trees. I stood up, my hands shaking, and listened. Then, just as I started to think it had stopped for good, I heard it again, this time, closer. Someone was out there. Watching. Waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran back inside, locking the door behind me. I went to grab my phone to call someone, anyone, but I had no signal. No way to reach anyone. I paced around the cabin, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't stay there, not with someone out there. I needed to leave. I grabbed my keys and ran outside to my car. But when I got to it, I saw all 4 tires had been slashed. The rubber was torn to shreds, and there was no way I could drive out of there. I stood there, staring at the tires, my heart pounding in my chest. I was trapped. Whoever was out there had done this. They wanted me stuck here. I ran back inside, locking the door again. I tried to calm down, but my mind was racing. What if they tried to get in? What if they were waiting for me to come outside again? I turned off all the lights and sat in the corner of the room, listening. The footsteps started again, circling the cabin, slower this time, like they were taunting me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave, and I had no way to contact anyone. I just sat there, waiting, hoping they would get bored and leave. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept going, round and round, for hours. Eventually, they stopped. I didn't move. I didn't trust it. I stayed there, huddled in the corner, listening for any sign of movement. The sun started to rise, and the light crept into the cabin. I stood up slowly, every muscle in my body tense. I opened the door a crack and looked outside. Nothing. No one. I walked around the cabin, checking for any signs of whoever had been out there. But there was nothing. Just the slashed tires and the silence of the woods. I didn't waste any time. I packed up my things and started walking. I knew there was a small town a few miles away, and I wasn't staying there another night. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way, but I didn't see anyone. No footsteps, no movement in the trees. I made it to the town by midday and called a tow truck to get my car. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. It felt too strange, too unreal. I had been planning this hike for a while. It was a long weekend, and I wanted to get away from everything. Just me, the trail, and some quiet time. The park I chose wasn't well known, which was perfect. I didn't want to deal with crowds or noisy campers. The trail was supposed to be remote, peaceful, and deep into the forest. That was exactly what I needed. I got an early start, hoping to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. The path wound through thick trees, and the deeper I went, the more isolated I felt. It was nice at first, no sounds except for the wind in the trees and the crunch of leaves under my boots. The sun filtered through the branches in patches, and it felt like I was the only person for miles. A few hours in, I hadn't seen anyone else. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. I stopped for a break, took off my backpack, and sat on a rock to drink some water. That's when I saw her. She was coming up the trail from the direction I'd just come. At first, I was surprised. I hadn't expected to see anyone, especially not this far into the woods. But as she got closer, I could tell something was off. Her clothes were dirty, and she looked out of place. Her hair was a mess, her eyes wide and frantic. She wasn't carrying anything with her. No backpack, no water, nothing. She spotted me and hurried over, stumbling a little as she walked. I stood up, unsure what to do. "Hey," she said, out of breath. "Can you help me? I'm lost." Her voice sounded shaky, like she'd been crying or panicking. I wasn't sure what to think. It's not like it's unheard of for people to get lost in the woods, but something about her seemed wrong. Still, I wasn't going to just leave her there. "Where did you come from?" I asked, looking around. There wasn't another trail for miles. "I don't know," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I've been walking for hours. I can't find my way back." Her story didn't make sense. How could she be out here without any gear? No map, no phone, not even a jacket. But she looked scared, and I didn't want to leave her in the woods alone. I figured I could help her get back to the main trail or at least point her in the right direction. "All right," I said. "Do you remember where you started from?" She shook her head. "No, I don't know. I was with someone, but I lost them." I didn't like the sound of that. Who was she with? Why wasn't she carrying anything? But I pushed the questions aside. If she was lost and alone, I needed to help her. "Let's walk together," I said. "Maybe we can find your way back." She nodded and followed me as I started walking. But the longer we went, the more uneasy I felt. She was walking too close to me, almost crowding me on the narrow path. Every time I tried to make conversation, she just gave vague answers or mumbled something I couldn't understand. After about 20 minutes, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. We'd been walking in circles. The same fallen tree we passed earlier was up ahead, the same split in the path that I'd already taken. I stopped. "Wait," I said. "We've been here before. We're going the wrong way." She didn't respond at first, just stood there, staring at me. Her expression had changed. She wasn't panicked anymore. Her face was blank, almost cold. "I think we should go back," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We'll head back to the main trail. There's a ranger station not far from there." For a second, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that sends a chill down your spine. "No," she said. "We need to go this way." She pointed down a narrow path, barely visible through the trees. It wasn't part of the main trail, just a small opening between the bushes. I hadn't noticed it before, and I definitely hadn't planned to go that way. "Why?" I asked, stepping back. "What's down there?" She didn't answer, just started walking toward the path. I didn't follow. My gut was screaming at me to turn around, to get out of there. Something was seriously wrong. "Wait," I said, my voice louder now. "Where are you going?" She stopped and turned to look at me, that same smile still on her face. "You should come with me," she said. "It's not safe out here alone." There was something in her voice that set off every alarm in my head. It was too calm, too rehearsed, like she'd said it before. And that's when I realized she wasn't lost. This was a setup. I took another step back, trying to put some distance between us. "I'm going back," I said, trying to sound firm. "You can come with me if you want, but I'm not going down there." Her smile faded, and her eyes narrowed. She took a step toward me. "You don't want to go that way," she said. "It's too far. You'll never make it." My heart was racing now. I knew I had to leave, but I didn't want to turn my back on her. I started backing up, keeping my eyes on her the whole time. She didn't move for a moment, just stood there, watching me. Then, without warning, she lunged. I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just needed to get away from her. Branches scratched at my arms and face as I tore through the trees, not looking back. I could hear her footsteps behind me, crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I kept running. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to put as much distance between us as possible. Finally, I burst out onto the main trail. I could still hear her behind me, but she was farther away now. I didn't stop. I kept running, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't slow down until I could no longer hear her footsteps. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I looked around. There was no sign of her. No sound except for the wind in the trees. But I wasn't going to wait around to see if she'd catch up. I turned and ran the rest of the way back to the parking lot. By the time I got there, my chest was tight and I could barely breathe. But I didn't stop. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of there as fast as I could. I had a long day at work and all I wanted to do was get home, have a drink, and go to bed. It was late by the time I got back, almost midnight. The street was quiet, not a sound besides my footsteps and the occasional car passing by in the distance. I was exhausted, mind on autopilot as I walked up the driveway. When I reached the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. Not enough to be wide open, but just enough that I could tell it hadn't been closed all the way. I didn't think much of it at first. My wife had a habit of leaving it unlocked if she knew I was coming home late, figuring I'd just lock up behind me. I made a mental note to remind her about it in the morning, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was dark, but that wasn't unusual. I expected her to be asleep already. I kicked off my shoes, tossing my keys on the table by the door, and made my way toward the kitchen to grab a drink. That's when I started to feel off. There was this weird sense that something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The house was quiet, but not in the way it usually was. It felt too still. I paused for a moment, listening. No sound of the TV in the background, no soft hum of the refrigerator. Just silence. My first thought was maybe the power had gone out, but the clock on the microwave was still glowing faintly in the dark. I shook it off, chalking it up to me being tired and overthinking. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and popped it open, leaning against the counter as I took a long drink. But the feeling didn't go away. It was nagging at me, this creeping sense of unease. I glanced around the kitchen, and that's when it hit me. The chairs. They were different. We had these old wooden chairs around the kitchen table, but the ones I was looking at now were metal, sleek and modern, not at all like what we owned. My stomach dropped. This wasn't my house. I felt a sudden rush of panic. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How could I have just walked into the wrong house? They all looked the same in the neighborhood, but I've been living here for years. I knew my own place, didn't I? And yet, here I was, standing in a stranger's kitchen. I set the beer down, careful not to make a sound. My heart was pounding now, and I realized I needed to get out of there. Fast. I turned toward the door, but before I could take a step, I heard a sound behind me. A soft creak, like someone shifting their weight. I froze. Who the hell are you? The voice came from the doorway. I whipped around and saw a man standing there, half hidden in the shadows. He was holding something, a bat or a club. I couldn't tell. My heart was racing, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I'm sorry, I stammered. I thought this was my house. He didn't move, didn't lower the bat. He just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to figure out whether I was telling the truth or not. Your house. His voice was low, calm, but there was an edge to it. You're in the wrong place, buddy. I know, I said quickly, raising my hands a little to show I wasn't a threat. I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention, and... Shut up. I stopped talking, my mouth dry. He took a step closer, the bat still raised. What are you doing here? He asked again, slower this time, like he was giving me one last chance to explain myself. I could see his eyes now, and there was something in them that made my skin crawl. I swear, it was an accident, I said. I thought I was home. I'll leave right now. He didn't answer. He just stood there, gripping the bat so hard I could hear his knuckles cracking. I took a small step back, hoping he'd let me go, but he didn't move. Why should I believe you? He said, his voice soft but dangerous. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could say anything, he lunged at me. The bat swung toward my head, and I barely managed to duck in time. It missed me by inches, slamming into the countertop with a loud crack. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted for the front door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy as he chased after me. I didn't dare look back. I reached the door and yanked it open, stumbling out onto the porch. I ran down the driveway, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, gasping for breath, my head spinning. Only then did I turn around to look. The man was standing in the doorway, still holding the bat, watching me. He didn't chase me, didn't say anything. He just stood there, his face shadowed in the porch light. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I turned and ran again, all the way back to my own house, my real house this time. When I got inside, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. I was shaking all over. My hands, my legs, everything. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had walked into someone else's house, thinking it was mine, and almost got my head bashed in for it. I checked the time. It was nearly 1 a.m. My wife was already asleep, completely unaware of what had just happened. I didn't wake her. I didn't even tell her the next day. But now, every time I come home late, I double-check the address before I go inside. I've been jogging at night for as long as I can remember. I know it's not the safest thing to do, but it's when I feel most alive. The air is cooler, the streets quieter, and it's the only time I can really clear my head. I never really worried much about running alone, even though people warned me. Just be careful, they'd say, and I'd nod, but never gave it much thought. I knew my usual route well and never had a problem. That night, I remember everything feeling normal, or at least it did at first. I left my house just after sunset, laced up my shoes, and hit the pavement. The sky was a deep purple, fading into black as the last bit of daylight disappeared. There were a few people still walking around, couples on their evening strolls, but soon enough the streets emptied, and it was just me and the sound of my feet hitting the ground. I was about 2 miles in when I first noticed him. At first, he didn't seem out of place, just another person walking on the sidewalk. He was a little further behind me, but it was a quiet enough night that I could hear the steady pace of his footsteps. They weren't fast, just a slow, even rhythm. I didn't think anything of it at first. People walk around here all the time. It wasn't until I turned onto a smaller street, one I liked because it was usually empty, that I noticed he was still behind me. This street didn't go anywhere except through a quiet residential area, and it wasn't a shortcut to anything. So why was he still there? I tried to brush it off. Maybe he lived nearby. But something about his pace, the way it stayed consistent with mine, started to bother me. I slowed down, just to see what he'd do. His steps slowed, too. Okay, maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just walking home at the same time, same pace. That happens, right? I tried not to overthink it. But then I sped up a little, just to test it. And sure enough, his steps quickened, too. That's when the knot of fear started forming in my stomach. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to be casual about it. He was still there, just a little closer now, still keeping that same distance behind me. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light from the street lamps, but he was tall, wearing dark clothes, and his head was down, like he was trying not to be noticed. But I noticed. I turned my head back around, my heart starting to pound. I told myself to stay calm, not to panic, but every instinct I had was screaming at me that something wasn't right. I knew I needed to change my route. I didn't want to go straight home, not with him behind me. I wasn't sure if he was just some guy on his own walk or if he was actually following me, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I turned down another side street, hoping maybe he'd keep going straight. But he didn't. I didn't have to look to know he had turned with me. I could hear it, his footsteps still there, matching mine. He was following me. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I started running faster, my breath coming quicker now, but trying to keep it steady. I didn't want to look scared, didn't want to let him know he was getting to me. But my legs felt heavy, like I couldn't move fast enough, no matter how much I tried. I darted around another corner, hoping maybe I could lose him. But when I glanced back, he was still there, closer than before. He wasn't running, but his walk had turned into a fast stride, and I could feel him closing the distance between us. There were no cars passing by, no people out anymore. It was just me and him. I knew I couldn't outrun him. He was too close now. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in the pocket of my jacket, but pulling it out to call someone would slow me down, and I didn't have time. I could feel him gaining on me with every second. Up ahead, I saw a small alley that cut between two buildings. It was risky, but I didn't have much choice. If I kept going down the street, I'd be out in the open with nowhere to go. If I took the alley, maybe I could lose him. I made a split-second decision and veered into the alley, sprinting as fast as I could. It was narrow, with dumpsters lining one side and shadows stretching across the ground. My chest was burning, but I didn't stop. I just kept running, hoping maybe he wouldn't follow. But he did. I could hear his footsteps echoing off the walls, faster now, more urgent. He was coming after me. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I felt like I was going to throw up, but I couldn't stop. The alley opened up into another street, and I burst out of it, glancing around desperately. There was still no one around, no cars, no lights in the windows. It was like the whole world had emptied out, leaving just me and him. I turned right, running down the sidewalk, but I knew I couldn't keep this pace much longer. My legs were starting to give out, my lungs screaming for air. I could hear him behind me, closer than ever. I was running out of options. Up ahead, I saw a park, its entrance just a few yards away. The path through it was dark, lined with trees, but if I could make it inside, maybe I could hide. Maybe he wouldn't follow me into the trees. I veered off the street and into the park, my legs barely carrying me at this point. The path twisted and turned, disappearing into the shadows, and I followed it blindly. I didn't dare look back. I reached a small cluster of trees and ducked behind them, pressing myself against the rough bark, trying to control my breathing. My heart was racing, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep them still. I listened, straining to hear his footsteps, but there was nothing. Just silence. Had I lost him? For a few minutes, I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I was too scared to even breathe, afraid he'd hear me. I kept telling myself I was safe, that he was gone. But then I heard it. A twig snapping, not far from where I was hiding. He was still out there. He was looking for me. I pressed myself harder against the tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear him moving now, slow and deliberate, like he was searching for something. For me. I wanted to run, but I knew if I moved, he'd hear me. I was trapped. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but nothing seemed right. Every option felt like it would end with him catching me. Then I heard his voice. "Come out," he called, his tone calm, almost playful. "I know you're here." My blood turned to ice. He knew. He knew exactly where I was. I clenched my fists, trying to keep myself from shaking. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay hidden. If he found me, I didn't know what he would do, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I heard his footsteps getting closer. He was right there, just on the other side of the trees. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come any closer, praying he wouldn't find me. And then, just when I thought I was done for, I heard something else. A car driving down the street nearby. Its headlights cut through the darkness, and for a moment, I saw him, a tall, shadowy figure standing just a few feet away from me. He hesitated, glancing toward the sound of the car, and in that split second, I made my move. I bolted out from behind the trees, sprinting toward the street. I didn't look back, didn't care if he saw me. I just ran. I could see the headlights getting closer, and I waved my arms, screaming for help. The car slowed, the driver looking confused, but I didn't stop running. I reached the sidewalk just as the car pulled up beside me. The driver rolled down his window, a concerned look on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. I glanced back, expecting to see the man behind me, but he was gone. The park was empty, the path disappearing into the darkness. I didn't know where he'd gone, and I didn't care. I nodded, trying to catch my breath, my heart still pounding. "Yeah," I managed to say, though my voice was shaky. "I'm okay." But I wasn't. I knew I'd never feel safe running at night again. I moved into my dorm room halfway through the semester. There was some mix-up with housing at the start of the year, and I ended up living off campus for a few months. But eventually, they called and told me they had space for me. I didn't know much about my new roommate other than his name, Ryan. He was quiet when I first met him, didn't say much. He just gave me a nod when I introduced myself, then went back to unpacking. It wasn't unusual for people to keep to themselves, especially in a shared space, so I didn't think much of it. We didn't have to be best friends, just civil enough to share the room. At first, everything seemed fine. We'd pass each other in the hall or catch a glance across the room, but we never really talked. Ryan had this habit of keeping his side of the room spotless, though, which was kind of the opposite of how I lived. He'd neatly fold his clothes, stack his books, and even line up his shoes by the door. It felt a little obsessive, but I wasn't complaining. The weird stuff started happening about a week after I moved in. I noticed Ryan kept odd hours. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom or grab some water, and he'd be sitting at his desk in the dark, talking in hushed tones on his phone. He always had it pressed close to his ear, whispering in a voice too low for me to catch anything, but I could see his face lit up by the screen, his eyes darting around the room like he was afraid someone might overhear. I thought it was weird, but I figured it was none of my business. Maybe he had a girlfriend or something he didn't want to talk about. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. and saw him sitting on his bed, just staring at his phone. It wasn't like he was texting or scrolling or anything. He was just looking at it. The room was dead silent, but his eyes were glued to the screen like he was waiting for something. When I shifted in bed, his head snapped up, and he gave me this strange look, almost like he was surprised to see me there, like he'd forgotten I existed. Then there were the times he disappeared. It wasn't unusual for him to be gone all day or even for a couple of days at a time. At first, I thought maybe he was staying with friends or going home for the weekend, but he never mentioned anything. He'd just vanish, and then, out of nowhere, I'd wake up, and he'd be back, sitting on his bed, scrolling through his phone or scribbling something in a notebook. When I asked him where he'd been, he'd shrug and mumble something about being out. There was this one time, a Friday night, when things got really unsettling. I was getting ready to go out with some friends when these two guys showed up at our door. I didn't recognize them, and they looked rough, the kind of guys you wouldn't want to mess with. They didn't say much, just asked if Ryan was there. When I told them he wasn't, they exchanged this weird look before one of them nodded and said, "Tell him we came by. He knows what it's about." They left without saying anything else, but it left me feeling uneasy. When Ryan got back later that night, I told him about it, and he just stared at me. His eyes went cold, and he didn't say a word, just turned and walked to his side of the room. I could feel this tension hanging in the air after that, like he was mad at me for something, but I had no idea what. Things only got stranger after that. He started locking the door when he was alone in the room, even when I was supposed to be there. I'd knock, and it would take him a minute or two to let me in. Once, I heard voices inside, like he was talking to someone, but when he finally opened the door, there was no one else in there. I started feeling like I had to be careful around him, like I was walking on eggshells in my own room. It was this subtle change, but it made me anxious. I even considered asking for a room switch, but it seemed like too much trouble at the time. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was imagining things. Then one night, I woke up to him standing over me. It was pitch dark, but I could make out his silhouette looming at the edge of my bed. My heart jumped into my throat, and for a second, I couldn't even breathe. He was holding something in his hand, and it took me a second to realize it was a knife. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the glint of the blade in the faint light coming from the hallway under the door. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I just laid there, frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. He didn't move, didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring down at me, gripping the knife so tight his knuckles were white. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I jump up and run? Should I try to talk to him? I didn't know if he was sleepwalking or if this was something else, something way worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he took a step back, then another, and slowly lowered the knife. He didn't say a word, just turned around and walked back to his bed, sitting down like nothing had happened. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, he was gone. His bed was made, his things were still there, but he was just gone, like he had disappeared into thin air. I didn't see him for the next 2 days. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. I don't know why. Maybe I thought no one would believe me, or maybe I was just scared of what Ryan might do if he found out I told someone. When he finally came back, I avoided him as much as I could. I'd leave the room whenever he was there, spend as much time out of the dorm as possible, crashing at friends' places or staying late at the library. But every night, I'd come back, and he'd be there, sitting on his bed, that same blank look on his face, like nothing had ever happened. The tension kept building, and I could feel myself getting more and more paranoid. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced he was watching me, but whenever I opened my eyes, he'd be lying in bed, facing the wall, like he was asleep. Then, one night, I came back to the room, and all of his stuff was gone. His bed was stripped, his desk cleared out, even his clothes were gone. It was like he had just packed up and left without a word. I never saw him again after that. I asked around, but no one knew where he went. The housing office said he had moved out, but they didn't have any details. No one seemed to know anything about him, like he had never even been there. To this day, I don't know what he was planning that night or why he was standing over me with that knife. Maybe it was some kind of sick prank, or maybe it was something worse. But I can still see the look in his eyes when I think about it, and I know that whatever was going on in his head, it wasn't good. I work late shifts sometimes. It's part of my job, and I'm used to leaving the office when it's already dark outside. Last Friday was one of those nights. The office was almost empty, just a few of us left behind. I stayed later than usual because I had a deadline to meet, so by the time I was done, it was already past 10. The office building has a parking garage right next to it, and that's where I always park my car. It's convenient, but it's also not the best lit place. That night, I grabbed my bag, locked up my computer, and headed down to the garage. As soon as the elevator doors opened on the parking level, I could feel that something was off. It was too quiet, too still. The lights in the garage flickered a bit, but they always did that, so I brushed it off. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I had a long day, and I just wanted to get home. I walked over to my car, a few rows back from the elevator. I clicked the button on my keys to unlock it, and the headlights flashed for a second. The sound of the doors unlocking in the empty garage felt louder than usual. I got this strange feeling that someone was watching me, but when I glanced around, the place was empty. No other cars near mine. No footsteps. Just silence. I picked up my pace, feeling a bit silly for being jumpy. When I got to my car, I reached for the door handle, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights. A van, white and unmarked, rolled slowly into the garage, pulling up a few spots over from me. I didn't think much of it at first. It's a public garage, anyone can park here. But when the van stopped and the engine shut off, 2 men got out. They weren't dressed like office workers, and they didn't have any bags or briefcases. Just regular clothes, a bit scruffy. They both looked in my direction and started walking towards me. My heart jumped. "Hey, miss," one of them called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Looks like you've got a flat tire there. Need some help?" I froze for a second, then glanced down at my tires. None of them were flat. I knew that immediately, but I still crouched down a little, pretending to check. My gut told me something wasn't right. I stood up quickly, shaking my head. "No, I think I'm fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "Thanks, though." The second guy, who hadn't spoken yet, was grinning. They didn't stop walking. They were getting closer, and I was suddenly aware of how far away the elevator was. Too far to run. "Nah, you definitely got a flat," the first guy insisted. He was close now, too close for comfort. "We can help you fix it. Won't take long." I felt my stomach turn. There was no flat tire. I hadn't even parked near anything that could puncture it. My brain was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. My keys were already in my hand, so I took a step back and clicked the button to lock my car again. The sound startled them for a second. The second guy spoke for the first time, his voice lower and more serious. "Come on, we're just trying to help you out." I forced a smile, stepping back again, but this time towards the front of my car. "I appreciate it, but I really don't need any help. My car's fine." That's when I noticed the van. The passenger side door was slightly open. I hadn't seen it at first, but now it was clear. They were trying to get me closer to the van. My mouth went dry, and the adrenaline started kicking in. I realized how isolated I was. No one else was in the garage, no one to hear me if I screamed. The first guy was only a few feet away now, his hand reaching out toward me. "We insist," he said, his voice losing its friendly tone. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I had two options, run or make a scene. I wasn't about to stick around and see what their next move was. Without thinking, I took a step forward, raising my voice. I said, "No. Back off." It wasn't a scream, but it was loud enough to echo through the garage. The men hesitated, clearly not expecting me to push back. The second guy's grin faded, and the first guy's hand dropped. There was a brief moment where we all just stood there, the tension hanging in the air like a thick cloud. I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. I spun around, heading towards the garage exit as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. I could hear footsteps behind me, quick but not running. I didn't dare turn around. When I reached the exit, I glanced back. They were both standing near the van, watching me, their expressions hard to read. They didn't follow me out of the garage, but the way they stood there, just staring, sent chills down my spine. It felt like a warning. I rushed into the nearest well-lit street, my heart pounding in my chest. I flagged down a passing car and asked them to wait with me until I could get a ride. The guy in the car, an older man, looked concerned but didn't ask too many questions. I called for a rideshare, leaving my car behind. There was no way I was going back into that garage alone. Later, I reported the incident to the security for the building. They promised they'd check the cameras and have someone keep an eye on the garage, but I don't know if they ever did. The thought of those two men hanging around there, waiting for someone else, kept me awake for days. I haven't worked late since. If I ever do again, I'll make sure someone walks me to my car. That night, it felt like I'd barely escaped something awful. I keep replaying the scene in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't yelled, if I had gotten closer to the van. I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a break. Just a weekend to get away from the noise and stress of the city. I found this small place about 2 hours out, a cozy little cabin in the woods, perfect for some peace and quiet. It had good reviews, a friendly host named Mark, and it seemed like the right fit. It wasn't anything fancy, but that was fine with me. I wanted simple. I checked in on Friday afternoon. The cabin was just like the pictures, maybe even better. Wood paneling, a small fireplace, and large windows looking out at the trees. It felt private, like I was alone with nature. Exactly what I was hoping for. Mark had left a little welcome note on the kitchen table with his contact info in case I needed anything, which seemed nice. The first night was perfect. I cooked myself a simple meal, had a glass of wine, and sat by the fire. I felt relaxed in a way I hadn't in a long time. I went to bed early, and I don't remember the last time I slept so well. The next morning, around 10 a.m., I was just finishing my coffee when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a bit confused. When I opened the door, there was Mark, standing on the porch with a friendly smile. "Hey there. Just thought I'd swing by and see how you're settling in," he said. I was a little caught off guard, but I didn't think much of it. He was the host, after all, and maybe this was something he did for all his guests. "Everything's great," I told him. "Really loving the place." He nodded, but didn't leave right away. Instead, he glanced past me into the cabin. "Mind if I just pop in for a sec? I want to check on something real quick." I hesitated. It felt a little odd, but he seemed harmless enough. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. Mark walked in and started looking around, not really at anything specific. He glanced at the fireplace, walked over to the kitchen, then into the hallway. I stood there, waiting, feeling a bit awkward. "Everything okay?" I asked after a few minutes. He turned back to me and smiled again. "Oh, yeah. Just making sure everything's in working order. Gotta keep the place in tip-top shape for guests, you know?" I nodded, but something about it didn't sit right with me. He finally left after another few minutes, and I brushed it off. He was just being thorough, I told myself. But still, it left me feeling a little unsettled. The rest of the day was fine. I went for a walk in the woods, read a book, just relaxed. I tried not to think about the strange visit. I figured it was over. That evening, just as the sun was starting to set, I heard another knock. I froze for a second, not wanting to believe it, but sure enough, when I opened the door, there was Mark again. "Hey," he said, smiling like nothing was weird. "I forgot to check the water heater earlier. Do you mind if I take a quick look?" I stared at him, my stomach knotting up. Why was he here again? Is something wrong with it? "Oh, no. Just a routine check," he said, already stepping inside without waiting for an answer. This time, I followed him more closely. He didn't go to the water heater right away, though. He started poking around again, just like before, looking at things that didn't seem like they needed looking at. I stayed silent, but inside, I was getting more and more uncomfortable. Something was off, and I could feel it. After a few more minutes, he finally opened the door to the small closet where the water heater was. He didn't do much other than glance at it, then he turned to me with that same smile. "All good here," he said, and walked back toward the door. I didn't say anything this time, just watched as he left. When the door clicked shut behind him, I locked it. I sat on the couch for a while, trying to shake the feeling of unease. I kept telling myself that he was just being thorough, that it wasn't a big deal. But it was starting to feel like more than that. Why did he keep coming back? I went to bed that night, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. The wind, the creaking of the cabin, everything seemed amplified in the quiet. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling more and more anxious. Then, around midnight, I heard it again. A knock. This time, I didn't get up right away. I stayed in bed, heart pounding. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to see Mark again. But the knocking didn't stop. It was steady, slow, like whoever was on the other side knew I was awake. I grabbed my phone and crept to the window by the door, pulling the curtain aside just a little. It was Mark, standing on the porch, his face half hidden in the shadows. He wasn't smiling anymore. My stomach dropped. I didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away, phone clutched in my hand. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? The guy hadn't done anything illegal. He was just here. Too often. The knocking stopped after a while, but I didn't feel any better. I stayed up the rest of the night, pacing, watching the door, checking the windows. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. When the sun finally started to rise, I decided I wasn't going to stick around. I packed my things in record time, barely thinking about anything other than getting out of there. I was halfway to my car when I saw him. Mark was standing by the edge of the woods, just watching me. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, arms at his sides, his face expressionless. I didn't look back after that. I threw my bags in the car, started the engine, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. On the way home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that white truck of his behind me. But it never showed up. I didn't leave a review for the Airbnb. I didn't report it. I just wanted to forget about it, to pretend it never happened. It was late, later than I usually stayed out. I'd just finished a long shift at the diner, and I was looking forward to getting home and falling into bed. The drive wasn't supposed to take long, just a stretch of highway through the middle of nowhere, a few exits, and then home. But halfway there, the car started sputtering. I could feel the engine struggling, and I kept praying it would hold out until I got off the highway. It didn't. The car died completely, and I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. There were no lights, no other cars in sight. Just me, my dead car, and miles of darkness. I tried restarting the engine, but it wouldn't even turn over. Just a click. I wasn't great with cars, but I knew enough to realize I was stuck. I sat there for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, hoping maybe someone would drive by. But nothing. I checked my phone, no signal. Of course. I was in the middle of nowhere. I should have been smarter about my route, but it was the quickest way home. I decided to wait it out. Maybe in a little while, a car would pass, or I could figure something out. I kept the doors locked, just in case. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Every sound of the wind, the rustle of leaves, made my heart race. I felt exposed, like something was watching me from the shadows. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights coming up the road. My heart leaped with relief. I stepped out of the car and waved my arms. The car slowed down and pulled over in front of me. It was an old pickup truck, beat up and rusty. A man got out. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice carrying easily through the still night. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and wearing an old flannel jacket. Something about him felt off, but I was desperate. "Yeah, it just died on me," I said, trying to sound calm. He walked over and glanced at the car. "Mind if I take a look?" I hesitated, but I didn't have much of a choice. "Sure, go ahead." He popped the hood and fiddled with a few things. After a few minutes, He wiped his hands on his pants and shook his head. Looks like the engine shot. You're not gonna get this thing running tonight. My stomach dropped. Oh, do you know a tow company around here? He looked down the road and then back at me. Not this late, but I can give you a ride into town. There's a motel there. You can call someone in the morning. I didn't have a lot of options. I couldn't call anyone. It was either stay here all night or take the ride. Something in me screamed not to go with him, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was just a guy trying to help. Okay, I said, grabbing my bag from the car. Thanks. I really appreciate it. No problem, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I got into the truck. The inside smelled like old cigarettes and something else I couldn't place. I told myself it was fine. I just needed to get to town. We drove in silence for a while. I tried to relax, but my hands were clenched in my lap. I kept looking out the window, trying to figure out where we were. The highway was long and empty, but it didn't feel like we were heading toward town. I glanced over at him. So, how far is town? I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the road. Not far. Maybe another 20 minutes. That didn't feel right. I'd driven this road before, and we should have been close to town by now. My heart started racing again. I looked out the window again, and that's when I realized we weren't heading toward town. We were going the opposite direction. I was sure of it. I think you're going the wrong way, I said, my voice trembling. He glanced at me, his expression hard to read. Nah, this is the way. Don't worry. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I needed to get out of there. I looked at the door handle, thinking maybe I could jump out, but we were going too fast. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Are you sure? I asked, my voice shaking. I think we should have taken the other road back there. He didn't answer this time. He just kept driving, his grip on the wheel tightening. Panic set in. I looked around, trying to figure out what to do. I could see his phone on the dashboard. If I could just grab it, but what then? I didn't even know if it had service. The truck slowed down, and I realized he was turning onto a dirt road. My blood ran cold. There was nothing down that road. No lights, no houses. Just woods. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Where are we going? He didn't answer. The silence was suffocating. I knew then that I was in serious trouble. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I had to get out of the truck, but how? Suddenly, the truck hit a bump, and his phone slid off the dashboard onto the seat between us. He reached for it, but I was quicker. I grabbed it and held it close, my hand shaking. Give that back, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I just need to call someone, I said, trying to keep calm. I need to let them know I'm okay. He slowed the truck even more, pulling to the side of the dirt road. My heart was in my throat. I knew what was coming. He was going to stop, and then... But before he could fully pull over, I acted. I threw the phone onto the floor and yanked the door handle, shoving the door open with all my strength. I jumped out, hitting the ground hard, rolling over the gravel. Pain shot through my body, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I could hear him shouting behind me, the truck door slamming as he got out. But I didn't look back. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The trees loomed around me, and I had no idea where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The footsteps behind me grew louder, and I pushed myself harder, my legs burning. I could hear him cursing, his voice getting closer. I veered off the road, crashing into the trees, hoping they would slow him down. My heart pounded in my chest, and every part of me screamed to keep running. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like forever. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and I found myself in a small clearing, gasping for air. I collapsed against a tree, trying to catch my breath, my whole body trembling. I didn't know if he was still following me, but I didn't dare stop for long. I had to keep moving. In the end, I found my way to a small house. The lights were on, so I knocked. They called the police, and I managed to get home safe and sound. I've lived alone for about 5 years now, in a small house on the outskirts of a town that no one really talks about. It's the kind of place where you can hear the quiet, where nothing much happens. I moved here for that reason. I like the idea of being left alone, not having to worry about busy streets or loud neighbors. It's a small, one-story house with a decent-sized yard, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I've gotten used to the quiet. I guess I should say I was used to it. For the longest time, I didn't pay attention to the houses around mine. The people here kept to themselves, which I liked. I didn't have to bother with small talk or keep up appearances. But there's this one house, right across the street. The house isn't anything special. It's plain, a little run down, but it's been occupied since before I moved in. There's a guy who lives there. Older than me, maybe in his 40s or 50s, with grayish hair and this slouch to his posture like life has been slowly weighing him down. I can't tell you exactly when I started noticing him. He was always outside. Always. At first, I thought maybe he just liked the fresh air. He would be sitting on his porch, standing in his yard, or leaning against his fence. Always looking my way. It didn't matter what time of day it was. If I was leaving for work in the morning, he'd be there, just standing with his hands in his pockets, looking. If I was coming home late at night, there he'd be, barely visible in the shadows, but always looking. At first, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was one of those people who just didn't have much else going on and took an interest in the few neighbors he had. But it started to get under my skin. I'd catch him watching me through my windows, not up close, but from his yard. He never waved, never smiled, never made any effort to seem like he was doing anything other than staring. One evening, I came home from work, tired and stressed. I parked my car in the driveway and headed inside. There he was, standing just at the edge of his yard, facing my house. The light from the street lamp barely hit his face, but I could see his eyes on me. I tried not to look directly at him, tried not to show I noticed. I went inside, locked the door, and went about my night. Later, I was sitting in my living room, watching TV, and something felt off. It's hard to explain, but you know the feeling when you're being watched. That prickle at the back of your neck. I glanced over at the window, and sure enough, there he was. Standing in his yard, staring straight at me through the glass. I closed the blinds. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every sound made me jump. The creak of the house settling, the wind rustling outside, all of it put me on edge. But nothing happened, so I figured maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was just tired. The next few days were normal enough. He was still there, outside, watching, but he didn't get any closer, didn't do anything more than stare. I was starting to convince myself that maybe he was just harmless. Weird, but harmless. Then one night, I woke up to a sound. It was subtle, like something scraping. I listened for a minute, thinking it was just the wind or a branch brushing against the house. But then I heard it again. It was coming from the front door. My heart started racing, and I slowly got out of bed. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want whoever or whatever was out there to know I was awake. I crept through the hallway, my bare feet making almost no sound on the wooden floor. When I got close to the front door, I held my breath and listened. There it was again, the scraping, but this time, it was followed by a soft click. Someone was messing with the lock. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. My first instinct was to grab something to defend myself with, but all I had near me was an old umbrella. I stayed quiet, waiting to see if whoever was out there would try to force their way in. The doorknob rattled, and I could hear slow, deliberate breathing on the other side. I moved slowly to the front window, keeping myself low and out of sight. I peeked through a tiny gap in the blinds, and my stomach dropped. It was him. My neighbor. He was standing right at my front door, his face almost pressed against the glass of the small window in the door. His hand was on the knob, and his other hand was fiddling with something. I couldn't see what it was, but he was trying to get in. I felt a surge of panic. I needed to do something, but I didn't want to make a sound that might alert him. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could and grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator picked up, and I whispered as quietly as I could, explaining that someone was trying to break into my house. She asked me to stay on the line, but I hung up. I didn't want the sound of the phone to tip him off. I went back to the hallway, crouched down, and waited. I could hear him still messing with the lock, but he wasn't in yet. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, I heard the distant sound of sirens. He must have heard them too, because the rattling at the door stopped. I didn't dare move until I saw the flashing lights through the window. I peeked out again, and he was gone. Just like that. The police arrived, but by then, there was no sign of him. They searched the area, took my statement, and assured me they'd patrol the neighborhood more frequently. For the next few days, I didn't see him. His house was dark, his yard empty. I thought maybe the police scared him off. Maybe he knew he was being watched now, and he'd lay low. But then, one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft tap on the window. I froze. My mind raced, thinking of every possible explanation, but I knew it was him. Slowly, I walked over to the window and pulled the blinds aside just a crack. He was there. Standing right outside, inches from the glass, staring in. His eyes locked onto mine, and he didn't move. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stood there. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 again, but as soon as I did, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I haven't seen him since that night. His house is still there, but it's like he vanished. I don't know if he's watching from somewhere else, waiting, or if he's gone for good. The police said they keep an eye on the place, but there's only so much they can do. Every night, I check the windows. Every noise makes me jump. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe here again. All I know is that he was watching me, and for some reason, he wanted in. I'd always wanted to take a solo hiking trip, and after months of planning, I finally made it happen. I had researched the trails at the national park, picked a few that looked challenging but manageable, and made sure I had all the gear I needed. It felt good to step away from the noise of daily life and spend some time alone in nature. The park was beautiful, thick trees, birds chirping, and a fresh breeze that made me forget about everything else. I started early in the morning, planning to hike the main trail that would lead me to a scenic overlook. It wasn't a busy time of year, so I wasn't surprised that I didn't see many other hikers. A few hours in, as I reached a fork in the trail, I saw someone walking toward me. He was about my age, maybe a little older, carrying a large backpack and wearing a baseball cap. He seemed friendly enough, smiled as he got closer, and stopped to say hello. "Hey, you out here alone?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. I hesitated for a second. There was something about the question that made me uneasy, but I quickly pushed the thought away. "Yeah, just enjoying the quiet," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Same here," he replied. "I'm heading toward the overlook too. Mind if I walk with you for a bit? It's rare to meet someone out here." I wasn't sure, but I figured it couldn't hurt to have some company for a little while. Besides, he seemed harmless, and we were both headed in the same direction. So I nodded, and we started walking together. At first, it was fine. We talked about the trails, the park, and other hikes we had done. He seemed experienced, like he knew his way around the outdoors. But as we walked, I started to notice little things that made me feel off. He kept asking personal questions: where I was from, how long I'd been hiking, if anyone knew I was out here alone. I tried to deflect or give vague answers, but he kept pushing. After a while, we reached another fork in the trail. I knew we were supposed to take the right path to head toward the overlook, but he stopped and pointed to the left. "This way's quicker," he said. "Takes you to the same place, just cuts through a more scenic area." "I've been here before." I stared down the left trail. It wasn't marked, just a dirt path that seemed to disappear into the thick trees. Something didn't feel right. "I think I'll stick to the main trail," I said, hoping it didn't come off as rude. He shrugged but didn't move to follow me. "Suit yourself. But you're missing out. The best views are off the beaten path, you know?" I smiled politely, trying to keep the mood light, but I could feel the tension in my chest. "Maybe next time." We started walking again, but now there was a strange quiet between us. He didn't talk as much, just kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. I sped up, hoping to create some distance, but every time I picked up the pace, he matched it. After what felt like hours, we reached a spot where the trees opened up a bit and the sun filtered through. I could see the overlook up ahead, not too far now. But before I could say anything, he grabbed my arm. "Wait," he said, his grip tighter than it should have been. "Let's go this way. Trust me." I pulled my arm away, my heart racing. "I'm good. I'm going to stick to the main trail." He didn't let go at first, just stared at me for a moment, his eyes darker than they had been before. Then he stepped back and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself," he said again, his voice low. "I'll catch you later." I didn't respond. I just turned and started walking faster, almost jogging toward the overlook. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what had just happened. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. A few minutes later, I glanced over my shoulder. He wasn't there. Relief washed over me, and I slowed down, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just weird, and I had let my imagination get the best of me. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. Not close, but not far either. I picked up the pace again, my legs starting to ache from the long hike, but I couldn't stop. The footsteps got louder, and I felt the panic rise in my throat. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see him again. I reached the overlook, but it didn't feel like a victory. The view was beautiful, but all I could think about was getting out of there. I didn't stop to take it in. Instead, I looked around, searching for anyone else. But the place was empty. Just me. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel him nearby. I decided to head back, take the main trail and get out of the park as quickly as I could. But as I started down the path, I saw him again. He was standing a little ways off, just watching me. "Thought you might need help getting back," he called out, his voice too friendly, too casual. I didn't respond. I just kept walking, hoping he'd get the message. But he didn't. I could hear him following me, his footsteps in sync with mine. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt the adrenaline kicking in. I quickened my pace, but so did he. My mind raced. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just keep walking and hope he'd stop. I looked around for anything, another trail, a place to hide, a group of people, anything that would get me away from him. Suddenly, I saw a small, unmarked path off to the side. It wasn't the main trail, but it was something. Without thinking, I darted down it, my breath coming in short gasps. The trees closed in around me, and the path was uneven, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. For a few minutes, I thought I'd lost him. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the rustling of leaves. But then I heard it again, his footsteps, faster now, closer. Panic surged through me. I didn't know where this path led, didn't know if I was heading deeper into the wilderness or back toward the park's entrance. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him catch up. The trees started to thin out, and I saw a small clearing up ahead. I pushed through, my legs burning, and stumbled into the open. There, in the distance, I saw a couple of hikers. Relief flooded through me. I ran toward them, calling out for help. They turned, startled, but when they saw the look on my face, they hurried over. I didn't stop to explain, just pointed back toward the path I'd come from. "There's a guy following me," I managed to say between gasps. One of the hikers, a tall man with a serious expression, nodded and stepped forward. "Stay here," he said to me, then motioned to his friend. They walked back toward the path, but a few minutes later, they returned, shaking their heads. "He's gone," the man said. "No one's there." I didn't know what to think. I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't. But I was too shaken to argue. The hikers offered to walk me back to the main entrance, and I gratefully accepted. As we made our way back, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him again, but he was nowhere to be found. When I finally made it back to my car, I didn't waste any time. I got in and drove away, my hands shaking on the wheel. I've thought about that day a lot since then, about how close I came to something I don't even want to imagine. I never went back to that park. I don't think I ever will. I was on vacation in a country I'd always wanted to visit. It was one of those places you see on travel shows, lots of old buildings, street markets, and little cafes with people sitting outside, drinking coffee. The kind of place that's easy to get lost in, but in a good way. The weather was perfect, and everything felt right, like I'd finally gotten a break from my regular life. On my second day there, I was walking around the main square. It was crowded, tourists everywhere, families, kids, people sitting on benches taking in the sun. I had my camera out too, just taking photos of the buildings, the streets, trying to capture that feeling. At one point, I stopped by a fountain to get a better angle, and that's when I noticed him. He was standing maybe 50 feet away, across the square. He had a camera in his hand too, but it was pointed directly at me. At first, I didn't think much of it. There were a lot of people taking photos, and maybe I just happened to be in his shot. It didn't seem like a big deal. I went back to what I was doing and forgot about him. Later that day, I found this little side street with a couple of street vendors. I spent some time browsing, picking up a few small souvenirs, just enjoying the atmosphere. I turned around to leave, and there he was again. Same guy, same camera, pointed right at me. This time, I was sure of it. He was taking photos of me, not the buildings or the market, me. It felt weird, but I tried to shrug it off. I figured maybe he was just some other tourist and I was in his way, or maybe he was doing one of those photography projects, you know, where they take pictures of random people on the street. It wasn't that unusual, right? But still, it bugged me a little. I made a note of his face, though. He was average looking, kind of nondescript, wearing a gray jacket and a baseball cap. He could have been anyone, which made it creepier. I left the market and wandered toward a park I'd seen on a map. It wasn't far, just a few blocks away. I figured a walk through the park would calm my nerves, clear my head. But as soon as I got there and started walking along the path, I saw him again. This time, he was much closer. Not 50 feet away, but maybe 20. He was standing off to the side, pretending to look at something on his camera, but I knew better. He was following me. I stopped and pretended to tie my shoe, hoping to catch him off guard. I glanced up, and sure enough, he was looking right at me. The moment our eyes met, he turned and walked the other way. My stomach sank. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. He was following me, and he knew that I knew. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him, ask him what the hell he was doing, but the other part of me, the part that was starting to get scared, just wanted to get out of there. So, I left the park, walking quickly, trying not to look back too often but checking just enough to know that he was still there, keeping his distance but never too far behind. I decided to head back to my hotel. It was in a busier part of the city, near a lot of shops and restaurants. I figured if I could get to a crowded area, maybe he'd stop. Maybe he'd lose interest or realize I'd caught on and give up. But the closer I got to the hotel, the more nervous I became. What if he didn't stop? What if he was planning something? When I finally got to the hotel, I went straight to the lobby and hung around for a while, pretending to look at brochures, checking my phone, trying to seem casual. I didn't see him anymore, which was a relief. Maybe he'd given up. After about 30 minutes, I went up to my room and locked the door behind me. For a while, I just sat there, trying to convince myself I'd overreacted. Maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe it was just one of those weird things that happen when you're in a new place and don't know anyone. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I decided to take a day trip to a nearby town. I figured it would be a good way to get out of the city, clear my head. I took the bus, and for most of the day, I felt fine. The town was beautiful, quiet, with narrow streets and little shops. I spent the afternoon wandering around, taking photos, trying to enjoy myself. But then, as I was sitting outside a cafe, I saw him again. He was across the street, leaning against a wall, his camera aimed right at me. My heart started pounding. I couldn't believe it. He had followed me out of the city, all the way to this town. There was no way this was a coincidence anymore. He was following me, tracking me. I got up and left the cafe without even finishing my drink. I walked quickly, heading back toward the bus station, but he followed, keeping pace with me. Every time I glanced back, there he was, always just far enough away to not seem too obvious, but close enough that I knew he was watching. By the time I got to the bus station, I was in a full panic. I bought a ticket back to the city and boarded the bus, hoping he wouldn't get on. But as the bus pulled away, I saw him standing on the platform, staring at me. He didn't board the bus, but I knew this wasn't over. Back in the city, I didn't go straight to my hotel. I wandered around for a while, trying to lose him, even though I hadn't seen him since the bus station. I stopped at a busy square, sat on a bench, and tried to think. What was he after? Why me? Was it just random, or did he have some kind of plan? The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. I didn't know who he was, what he wanted, or how far he was willing to go. I finally went back to my hotel late in the afternoon, figuring I couldn't just stay out in the city all day. When I got to my room, I locked the door again, double-checked the windows, and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. But then my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, sitting on the bench in the square just a couple of hours earlier. He had been watching me the whole time. He had my number. He knew where I was, where I'd been. Panic hit me hard. I didn't know how he got my number, but now it was clear this wasn't just some random photographer. This was something much worse. I didn't know what to do. I thought about going to the police, but what could I say? That some guy had been taking photos of me? That he sent me a creepy text? I doubted they'd take it seriously. Still, I couldn't just sit there, waiting for him to make his next move. I packed my things and left the hotel, heading to a different part of the city. I found a new hotel, checked in, and stayed in my room for the rest of the night, too afraid to go outside. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message, but nothing came. I didn't sleep much, every little sound making me jump, wondering if he'd somehow found me again. The next morning, I decided to cut my trip short. I went to the airport and booked an early flight home. As I sat in the departure lounge, I kept looking around, scanning the faces of everyone around me, half expecting to see him with that camera, watching me. But he wasn't there. Or at least, I didn't see him. I boarded the plane and didn't relax until we were in the air, far away from that place. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, somewhere, watching me, waiting for the right moment to appear again. I was on a work trip, staying at this hotel that looked a little nicer than the ones I usually end up in. It was one of those chain hotels where you know what to expect, basic, clean, no frills. I had been to a few of them before, so I didn't think much about it. I checked in late, probably around 8 or 9 in the evening. The lobby was quiet, and the girl at the front desk barely looked up from her computer when she handed me the room key. Just the usual routine. I got to the room, but when I tried to swipe the key card, nothing happened. I thought maybe I had swiped it wrong, so I tried again, but still, the light didn't even blink. It was like the card wasn't recognized at all. I was tired, annoyed from traveling, and just wanted to get inside, drop my stuff, and relax. I tried a few more times, hoping it was just a bad angle, but the door wouldn't budge. So I turned around and headed back to the front desk. It was a bit of a walk. My room was at the end of a long hallway on the 3rd floor, and the elevators were slow. When I got back down there, the girl at the desk was still in the same spot, her eyes glued to the screen. I explained the situation, trying not to sound too frustrated, and she seemed confused for a second, like she couldn't believe the card wasn't working. She took my key, gave me a new one without much of an apology, and I headed back up. By then, all I wanted was to get into my room, put on the TV, and wind down before my meeting the next morning. When I got to the door again, I swiped the new card, and it worked immediately. The light blinked green, and the lock clicked open. I felt a small wave of relief. But when I pushed the door open, I froze. There was a man inside the room. He was standing by the bed, in the middle of the room, like he was waiting for something. He had a duffel bag on the floor, and it was clear he was unpacking. He didn't look surprised to see me, though. In fact, he just stared at me like I was the one who had barged in. I stood there in the doorway, not sure what to say. At first, I thought maybe I had the wrong room. Maybe the front desk had given me the wrong key and I had accidentally opened someone else's door. But no, I checked the number. It was definitely my room. I cleared my throat and finally said, "I'm sorry, I think this is my room." He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at me with this blank expression, like he didn't know what to say either. Then he shook his head and said, "No, this is my room. I've been here all night." My stomach dropped. That didn't make sense. I had just checked in, and this room was supposed to be mine. I hadn't seen anyone else on the floor when I got here, and there was no sign of anyone when I first tried to get in. The bed was made, the bathroom door was shut, and there wasn't anything personal in the room when I saw it through the crack the first time I tried my card. I told him that again, insisting that there must be some mistake. I could feel my heart starting to race because something about this didn't feel right. He didn't look like a typical guest. His clothes were plain, kind of wrinkled, and he looked rough, like he hadn't slept in a while. He didn't have that casual attitude most business travelers have, and the more I looked at him, the more something felt off. "I've been here since this morning," he repeated, his voice a little harder this time, like he was starting to get frustrated. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing with possibilities. Had the front desk made a mistake and double-booked the room? That happens sometimes, right? But then why didn't they tell me? And why was he acting so calm, like he wasn't surprised at all to see me standing there? I took a step back and said, "I'll just go check with the front desk again." He didn't try to stop me, but the way he looked at me as I backed out of the room made my skin crawl. His eyes followed me the whole time, never blinking, never looking away. As soon as I was out of the room, I hurried back down to the front desk, almost jogging by the time I got to the elevator. When I reached the lobby, the girl at the front desk looked surprised to see me again. I told her what had happened, trying to stay calm but probably sounding more panicked than I wanted to. I explained that there was a man in my room, claiming it was his, and that he had a bag, like he had been staying there for a while. She blinked at me, confused, and started typing on her computer. After a minute, she said, "There's no one else booked in that room. You're the only guest assigned to that number." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But he's in there," I said, trying to make her understand. "He has a bag, and he says it's his room." She looked up from her computer, clearly unsure of what to say. "Let me call security," she finally said, reaching for the phone. It felt like forever before security arrived, but when they did, they were just as confused as the front desk girl. They told me to wait in the lobby while they went up to check the room. I sat on one of those stiff lobby chairs, my mind racing, wondering who that man was and how he had gotten into my room. Was he just a confused guest? Was he dangerous? I had no idea. When the security guards finally came back down, one of them walked over to me. "There's no one in the room," he said. I stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "He was just there. I saw him." The guard shook his head. "The room is empty. We checked everywhere, even the closets. There's no sign of anyone and no personal belongings. The bed's still made, and it looks like no one's been in there at all." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. That didn't make any sense. I had just seen the man, seen his bag on the floor, his clothes hanging out of it. There was no way he could have just disappeared in the time it took me to come back down to the lobby and get security. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaking. He was right there. He had a duffel bag. I saw him. The guard looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know how to explain it to me. "We check everywhere," he said again. "There's no one there." They offered to move me to another room, but I was too freaked out to stay. I asked if I could just check out early and find another hotel. The front desk didn't argue. They refunded me without asking any questions, like they didn't want to deal with it either. I spent the rest of the night in a different hotel, but I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was that man, standing there in the middle of my room, acting like he belonged there. How had he gotten in? Where did he go? I never got any answers. I had been planning the camping trip for months. It was the first break I had in a while, and I needed it. I found this spot online, a remote section of the national forest where you could camp without seeing another soul for days. The reviews all said the same thing: quiet, untouched, peaceful. Just what I was looking for. It took me about 6 hours of driving, then another hour hiking off the main trail, but when I got there, it was perfect. No cars, no people. The trees were tall and thick, and the clearing I found was just big enough for my tent and a small fire pit. I set up camp quickly, eager to settle in before nightfall. There was a small stream nearby, which made it even better. I was planning to stay for 2 nights, maybe 3 if the weather held out. The first couple of hours were everything I hoped for. The silence was almost unsettling at first, but I got used to it. I cooked up some dinner over the fire and sat there, staring into the flames, feeling the tension in my body finally start to ease. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the wind moving through the trees. It was exactly what I needed. As the sun set and the light started to fade, I crawled into my tent. I left the fire going, but banked it so it would burn low, just enough to keep the chill away. I was tired, but in a good way. I figured I'd fall asleep as soon as I lay down. But then I heard something. At first, it was faint, just a rustling in the bushes. I assumed it was some small animal, a raccoon or a deer. This was the middle of the forest, after all. But then I heard it again, louder this time. The sound of footsteps, not too far away. Slow, deliberate. Someone was walking through the woods. I froze. My heart started racing, but I tried to calm myself down. It could be another camper, I thought. Maybe someone else had found the same spot. Or it could be a ranger doing rounds, though it seemed unlikely out here. I didn't hear any voices, though. Just the footsteps. Then they stopped. Dead silence. I sat up in my tent, listening as hard as I could. The fire outside was still crackling softly, but beyond that, nothing. Just when I started to think I had imagined it, I heard voices. Low, gruff, almost like they were trying to stay quiet. It sounded like 2, maybe 3 men, talking just out of earshot. They weren't close enough for me to make out what they were saying, but they were there, somewhere in the dark, just beyond my camp. I felt a wave of panic, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of the night? I didn't see anyone on the trail, and this was supposed to be a remote part of the forest. I stayed completely still, straining to hear more, but the voices stayed low, like they didn't want me to know they were there. Then, the footsteps started again, closer this time. Coming toward my camp. I didn't know what to do. My tent was zipped up, the fire was low, and I had no weapons, nothing that would be any use if these guys meant trouble. I thought about grabbing my phone, calling for help, but there was no service out here. I was completely cut off. The footsteps stopped again, and I could hear them talking more clearly now, though I still couldn't make out the words. They were close. Too close. Then one of them spoke louder, almost a shout. "Hey! You in the tent?" I didn't answer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. I stayed as still as I could, hoping they would just go away, but they didn't. One of them laughed, a rough, cruel sound. "Yeah, we see you," the same voice said. "This is our spot, buddy. You need to leave." I swallowed hard, trying to think of what to do. I didn't want to make them mad, but I wasn't about to pack up my camp in the middle of the night and hike out of there. But then the voice spoke again, and there was no mistaking the threat this time. "If you don't leave now, we'll make you leave." I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. There were 3 of them, standing just at the edge of the firelight. They were big, all wearing dark clothes, and they weren't carrying backpacks or gear. They weren't here to camp. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't know this was anyone's spot. "I can move in the morning." The one in front, the one who had spoken, stepped forward. His face was rough, weathered, and he had this twisted grin like he enjoyed seeing me scared. "You're gonna leave now," he said, "or things are gonna get real bad for you." The other 2 moved closer, and I could see they were all carrying something. One had a long branch, the other something shiny, maybe a knife. My blood ran cold. These guys weren't just trying to scare me, they meant business. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking. Okay, I said, "I'll go." "Good choice," the leader said, smiling wider now. "Pack up fast." I started shoving my things into my backpack as quickly as I could, my mind racing. I kept glancing at them, hoping they'd stay back, but they didn't move. They just stood there, watching me, like they were enjoying the whole thing. My fingers fumbled with the tent poles, and I was taking too long. I could tell they were getting impatient. "Hurry up," one of the others growled. "We ain't got all night." I finally got everything packed, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely tie my shoes. I didn't know what I was going to do. Even if I left now, where would I go? It was pitch black outside the camp, and I didn't know the area well enough to hike out in the dark. But I couldn't stay here. "Get moving," the leader said, stepping closer. "Now!" I grabbed my bag, threw it over my shoulder, and started walking. They followed me, keeping just behind, their footsteps heavy and slow, like they had all the time in the world. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to get out of the clearing and back to the trail, or maybe I could lose them. But the trail was dark, and the further I walked, the more I realized I wasn't sure which way to go. The trees all looked the same in the dark, and I couldn't see the markers I had followed in. I felt panic rising in my chest again. What if I was walking in circles? What if they were just waiting for me to get far enough away from the camp before they... "Stop!" The voice came from right behind me, and I stopped in my tracks. The leader walked around to face me, his smile gone now. He was holding something in his hand, something heavy. I couldn't tell what it was in the dark, but I didn't want to find out. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're just walking us in circles." I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him I was trying to find the trail, but he didn't let me speak. "You think we're stupid?" he snapped. "You think you're going to lead us around until you can get away?" "No, I'm not." "You are," he said, stepping closer. "But it ain't gonna work." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to talk my way out of this. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were angry, and I could tell by the way they looked at me that they weren't going to let me leave. One of the others stepped forward, the one with the knife. He flicked it open, the blade catching the little bit of moonlight that filtered through the trees. "You got two choices," the leader said. "You can leave with us, or you can leave in pieces." I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. All I could think was that I was going to die out here, in the middle of nowhere, and no one would ever know. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud crash from somewhere deep in the woods. All three of them turned, distracted for just a second, and I didn't wait to see what it was. I bolted, running as fast as I could into the darkness, branches whipping against my face, my legs burning with every step. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. I could hear them shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I kept running, my lungs on fire, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I couldn't hear them anymore, until the only sound was the blood rushing through my head. I spent the rest of the night hiding, crouched behind a fallen tree, too scared to move. When the sun finally came up, I found the trail again and hiked back to my car. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that forest. I don't know what those men wanted, but I'm not going back to find out. It was a Friday night, later than I planned to be out. I had been visiting a friend out in the country, and the drive back to my apartment was about an hour and a half, mostly down empty highways with nothing but trees on either side. I'd done it plenty of times before and never thought twice about it. Honestly, I kind of liked the drive. It was quiet, calming, a good way to wind down after a long week. The road was dark, no street lights out here, just my headlights cutting through the black. I had the radio on low, some old classic rock playing, and I wasn't in any rush to get home. I was tired, sure, but it was one of those nights where the cool air through the window made me feel more awake. It was probably about 30 minutes into the drive when I noticed the car behind me. It wasn't there before, I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles, and suddenly, it was just there. At first, I didn't think anything of it. People drive, right? I wasn't alone on the road, after all. But what got my attention was how close they were. Way too close. I glanced in my rearview mirror, trying to get a look at the car. It was dark, and their headlights were almost blinding in my mirror, so I couldn't make out much. But they were tailing me hard, like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. I figured maybe they'd pass me soon. That stretch of road was mostly straight, plenty of room to overtake me if they were in a rush. Except they didn't pass. I sped up a little, not too much, just enough to put some distance between us. The speed limit out here was 55, and I was already doing a bit over that. I pushed it up to 65, just to see what they'd do. They stayed right on my tail. I could feel my heartbeat start to pick up, and I told myself it was fine. They were probably just some jerk who didn't know how to drive. But still, I didn't like it. I didn't like how close they were, like they were practically on top of me. I sped up more. 70 now. The trees blurred past the window, and the road stretched out endlessly in front of me, nothing but darkness on either side. But the car didn't back off. It kept right behind me, matching my speed perfectly. I felt my chest tighten, and I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe they just didn't realize how close they were. Maybe they were distracted, texting or something, not paying attention. I tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tapped my brakes lightly, just enough to flash my taillights, hoping it would signal to them to back off. But it didn't. If anything, they seemed to get even closer. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I could feel sweat starting to form on the back of my neck. Okay, I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. Just let them pass. They'll pass soon. I slowed down. I figured if I dropped my speed enough, they'd have no choice but to go around me. 60, then 55, down to 50. My car started to creep slower, but they stayed right there, their headlights blinding me through the mirror. They weren't trying to pass. They were sticking with me. My heart was racing now, and I could feel panic building up in my chest. What the hell was this person doing? I tried to think. Maybe they were lost, trying to follow me somewhere. Or maybe they were drunk, just messing with me. But then why wouldn't they pass? I hit the gas again, pushing my car back up to 70. My mind was spinning, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching them, waiting for them to make a move. But they just stayed there, like a shadow, following me no matter how fast I went. I was starting to feel trapped, the empty road stretching out in front of me with no end in sight. No other cars, no exits, no place to pull over. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen a gas station or any kind of building, but it had been miles back. There was nothing out here. Just me and whoever was in that car. Then, suddenly, they swerved. It wasn't just a little swerve, like they were dodging something. No, they swung their car sharply to the left, almost into the other lane, and then jerked back behind me. My heart leapt into my throat, and I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to keep control of my car. What the hell were they doing? I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears now, and I sped up even more, pushing 75. The car behind me didn't hesitate, they sped up too, still sticking right on my bumper. And then they did it again. Another hard swerve, this time to the right, their car veering toward the shoulder before jerking back into the lane, right behind me. It was like they were trying to run me off the road. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I stop? Should I pull over and let them go past? But something about the way they were driving told me that wasn't a good idea. They weren't just being aggressive. This felt deliberate. They were toying with me. I could feel panic clawing in my throat now, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching as they swerved again, this time coming dangerously close to the side of my car. I swerved to the left, trying to get away from them, but there wasn't much room on the road. If I veered too far, I'd end up in the trees. Shit, I muttered, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I had to think. I had to do something. I scanned the road ahead, looking for any sign of a turn-off, an exit, something. But there was nothing. Just endless highway, stretching out into the darkness. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A small dirt road off to the right, barely visible in the dim light of my headlights. It wasn't marked, and I had no idea where it led, but I didn't care. It was the only option I had. I swerved hard to the right, my tires screeching as I veered off the highway and onto the dirt road. My car jolted and bounced over the uneven ground, and I heard the car behind me screech to a stop, their tires skidding on the pavement. For a moment, I thought I had lost them. But then, in the rearview mirror, I saw their headlights swing toward me. They were following. I floored it, my car bouncing and shaking as I sped down the narrow dirt road. The trees closed in around me, the branches scraping against the sides of my car. The road was rough, full of piles and rocks, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The car behind me was still there, their headlights flickering through the trees. They were getting closer again, their engine roaring as they sped up, closing the gap between us. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. I didn't know how much further this road went or where it led, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them catch me. The road twisted and turned, and I struggled to keep control of the car. My tires skidded on the loose gravel, and I could feel the car starting to slide. I fought to keep it on the road, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. And then, just ahead, I saw it. A small clearing just off the road. I didn't have time to think. I yanked the wheel to the left, swerving into the clearing and killing the headlights. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop behind a thick cluster of trees. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears as I watched the road. The other car roared past, their headlights sweeping through the trees as they sped down the road, not realizing I had turned off. I waited, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't move. I didn't dare turn the car back on. I just sat there, hidden in the shadows, hoping they wouldn't come back. Minutes passed. Then more. I waited, my body tense, ready to bolt at any moment. But the car never returned. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I started the car again. I drove slowly, carefully, staying off the main roads, keeping my headlights low. I didn't stop until I was miles away, safe in a crowded parking lot of a 24-hour gas station. I never found out who they were or what they wanted. But I know one thing, I'm never driving that stretch of road at night again. I went out with Mike that night. Just the two of us, nothing special, just a few drinks after a long week at work. We hadn't seen each other in a while, so when he called me up and asked if I was free, I figured, why not? We chose a bar downtown, one of those old places that's been there forever, kind of divey, but the drinks are cheap and strong, so it was perfect. We got there around 9, grabbed a small table in the back. Mike was in good spirits, talking about how work had been rough lately but that he was thinking about moving to another city for a fresh start. I remember it felt good to just relax and catch up like we used to. It had been a while since we'd done that, both of us getting caught up in our own lives. A couple of beers in, I had to hit the bathroom. I remember it was a little past 10 at that point. I told Mike I'd be right back, and he just nodded, scrolling through his phone, like he was checking something, maybe a text or social media. I didn't think anything of it. The bathroom was a bit of a walk from where we were sitting, tucked down a narrow hallway in the back of the bar. I was gone maybe 3 or 4 minutes, tops. When I got back, Mike wasn't at the table. At first, I just thought he'd gone to the bathroom too or maybe stepped out for some air. I waited a bit, finished off the rest of my beer, and kept glancing toward the door, expecting him to come back any second. But he didn't. 5 minutes went by, then 10. I started to get that weird feeling, like something was off. You know, that gut feeling when something's not right. I flagged down the waitress, asked if she'd seen where my buddy went. She just gave me a blank look, like she had no idea who I was talking about. I pointed to the empty chair across from me, said we'd been sitting there for the last hour. She looked confused. She said I'd been sitting there alone all night. That made me stop. I stared at her, thinking she was messing with me. No, I was here with my friend, I said, maybe a little too sharply. Mike. He was right here. But she didn't budge. She just shook her head, and her expression didn't change. Sorry, hon, she said. You've been by yourself since you came in. I felt a chill go down my spine. What the hell was she talking about? I'd been there with Mike the whole time. We'd been talking, drinking. There was no way she could have missed him. I started looking around the bar, trying to find someone else who might have noticed us. There were a few regulars at the bar, guys who looked like they hadn't moved in hours, but none of them even glanced my way. No one seemed to care. I went up to the bartender next, asked if he'd seen my friend. He just gave me a shrug, said he didn't remember anyone like that. We get a lot of people in here, man, he said, not even bothering to look at me properly. If he left, he left. By now, I was starting to get really nervous. Something didn't feel right. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Mike. It rang a couple times, then went straight to voicemail. I sent him a quick text, asking where he went, if he was okay. I figured maybe he stepped outside for a smoke or something, even though he doesn't really smoke. I don't know, I was just trying to come up with some kind of explanation. A few more minutes passed, and I was just about to head outside to check when my phone buzzed. A new message. It was from Mike's number. But the message didn't sound like him. Don't worry about Mike. That was all it said. Just 4 words. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of it. What the hell did that mean? Was someone messing with me? I tried calling again, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent another text. Mike? What's going on? Another buzz, another message. He's fine. Forget about him. I felt my hands start to shake. This wasn't Mike. It couldn't be. Someone had his phone, but who? And why were they sending me these messages? I looked around the bar again, but no one seemed to be paying any attention to me. Everything felt wrong, like I was suddenly in a place I didn't recognize. I got up and headed outside, hoping maybe I'd see Mike standing there, but the sidewalk was empty. The street was quiet, just a few cars passing by every now and then. I tried to think, tried to figure out what to do next. Should I call the cops? But what would I even tell them? My friend was missing, and now I was getting weird messages from his phone. As I stood there, trying to collect my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. Stop looking. You'll regret it. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Who was this? And what did they mean by regret it? My mind was racing. I looked down the street, half expecting to see someone watching me, but there was no one. Just the usual late-night quiet of the city. I tried calling Mike one more time, but this time, the call didn't even ring. It just went straight to a message that said the number was no longer in service. I couldn't stay there. I had to do something. I got in my car and drove straight to Mike's apartment, my mind spinning the whole way. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to remember if anything strange had happened earlier in the night, anything that might explain this. But nothing made sense. When I got to Mike's place, the lights were off. I knocked on the door, then banged on it when he didn't answer. I must have stood there for 5 minutes, just knocking and waiting, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement inside. It was like he wasn't even there. I thought about calling the cops again, but what would I say? That my friend was missing, but maybe he wasn't? That I was getting strange texts from his phone? They'd probably think I was crazy. I went back to my car and just sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for another message. But none came. The street was quiet, the whole city felt like it was asleep, and I was just sitting there, alone. I don't know how long I waited. Maybe an hour, maybe more. But eventually, I realized I wasn't going to get any answers. I went home, hoping that maybe in the morning, things would make more sense. But they didn't. The next day, I tried calling Mike again. Still nothing. His phone was still out of service, and there was no sign of him anywhere. I drove by his apartment again later that night, but the lights were still off, and no one answered the door. A few days passed, and I finally went to the police. I told them everything, about how Mike had disappeared, about the texts, about how no one at the bar seemed to remember him. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They probably thought he'd just taken off on his own, or that I was imagining things. I never heard from Mike again. No more texts, no more calls. It was like he'd just vanished. But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I still think about those messages. I still wonder who sent them and what they meant. And I still wonder if maybe I should have listened. When I inherited the farmhouse, I didn't think much about it. I had never known this relative well. My great-uncle on my mother's side. I'd only met him a handful of times at family reunions when I was younger, but when he passed, the house came to me. It was old, sure, and the pictures I'd seen made it look run down, but the idea of owning property seemed too good to pass up. A fresh start, I told myself. So, I packed my things and made the long drive out to the middle of nowhere, ready to settle into a new life. The house was tucked away from town, a good 30-minute drive down a dirt road. The nearest neighbor was a mile away, and even the road felt isolated. There was nothing but fields and trees, and the silence was a bit unsettling. The house itself sat in the middle of this vast open space, looking as lonely as I felt standing there on the front porch. It was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, peeling white paint, and windows that had probably seen better days. The roof looked intact, though, and the structure seemed sound enough. I figured it would take some work, but I had time. I was in no rush to go anywhere. The inside was dusty, with creaky floorboards and outdated wallpaper, but there was a certain charm to it. It felt like stepping back in time. I moved in that weekend, figuring I'd deal with whatever repairs came up as they happened. The first few days were peaceful, in a strange way. The kind of quiet you don't get in the city. No car horns, no people shouting on the streets. Just wind, and the occasional creak of the house settling. It didn't take long before I started noticing little things, though. Things that didn't sit right. The first thing was the barn. It sat about 50 yards from the house, and it was in even worse shape than the main building. I had no intention of using it, so I didn't pay it much attention. But a few days after I moved in, I noticed that the barn door, which had been hanging slightly ajar, was now closed. I chalked it up to the wind, but it bothered me enough to go check it out. The door was heavy, old wood swollen with years of neglect, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. Inside, the barn was empty. No signs of animals or people. Just cobwebs and the smell of rot. I shrugged it off and went back to the house, figuring I was just getting jumpy being out here by myself. A couple of days later, I met some of the locals in town. The hardware store owner, an older man named Jack, asked where I was staying. When I told him, his face changed. His polite smile faltered for just a second, but enough that I noticed. That old farmhouse, he said, almost to himself. You be careful out there. Place has a history. I laughed it off, asking what kind of history, but he didn't give me much. Just some muttering about the previous owners who had vanished. Never found a trace of him, he said. That was years ago now. Folks around here don't talk about it much. I didn't press for details. Maybe I should have. That night, I woke up to a noise outside. It was faint, just a scraping sound, like something dragging across the porch. I lay there for a minute, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was an animal. But something about it didn't feel right. I got up, crept to the window, and peeked through the curtains. In the moonlight, I could just make out a figure standing by the barn. They weren't moving. Just standing there, facing the house. I froze. My first thought was to grab my phone and call the police, but by the time I found it, The person was gone. I stared out at the empty yard, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just some local kid playing a prank. That's what I told myself, anyway. But I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt outside the barn. Fresh ones, leading right up to the door. I didn't go near it. Something about the whole situation was starting to feel off. It wasn't just the isolation or the old stories the locals hinted at. It was the way the air felt heavier, how the wind seemed to die down at night, leaving everything eerily still. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, the noise was louder footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move from my bed. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, holding my breath. After what felt like hours, the footsteps stopped, and I heard the sound of the barn door creaking open. I didn't get up to check. I was too scared. In the morning, the barn door was closed again. I didn't open it this time. I didn't want to know what was inside. I stayed inside the house all day, trying to distract myself, but as the sun set, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out here. That whoever or whatever was watching me wasn't finished. That night, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I kept the lights off, hoping that if they came back, they wouldn't know I was awake. Sure enough, around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they didn't stop at the porch. They circled the house, slow and steady. I could hear them crunching in the gravel outside, pacing back and forth. Every so often, I hear a soft tap on one of the windows, like someone testing it. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just waited, heart pounding in my chest, hoping they'd go away. After what felt like forever, the footsteps stopped. But I didn't relax. I couldn't. I lay there, wide-eyed, until dawn. The next morning, I found something on the porch. A small, rusted key sitting right in front of the door. I don't know where it came from, but I had a feeling it belonged to the barn. I didn't touch it. That was the last straw for me. I called a locksmith that day and had him change all the locks on the house. I didn't tell him why. I just wanted to feel safe again, even if it was a false sense of security. But that night, as I was locking up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The key I found that morning, it was gone. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside had me on edge. I felt like I was being watched, even though I hadn't seen anyone since that night by the barn. But I knew they were out there, waiting. The next day, I went into town again, hoping to find some answers. Jack, the hardware store owner, was more forthcoming this time. "I don't know what's been going on out there," he said, leaning in close, "but you're not the first to see things. People in these parts have always known something's off with that place. Those that live there don't tend to stay long." I didn't ask him what he meant by that. I didn't want to know. That night, I was determined not to let my fear get the best of me. I locked up as usual, checked the windows, and went to bed. But around midnight, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder. Closer. I could hear them on the porch, then right outside my bedroom window. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, like someone was demanding to be let in. I held my breath, praying they'd go away. But the knocking came again, louder this time. More insistent. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then something stopped me. The knocking wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the back. My heart sank. I realized, with a sickening dread, that there were more than one of them. They were trying to get in, trying to corner me. I dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. Of course. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, I was completely cut off. I was on my own. The knocking grew more frantic. First at the back door, then the windows. It was like they were everywhere, surrounding the house. I could hear them whispering now, low and guttural, but I couldn't make out the words. My mind raced with panic. I didn't know what to do. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. The whispers faded. I waited, listening, but all I heard was the wind. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I packed my things. I wasn't staying here another night. Whatever was out there, whoever had been tormenting me, I wasn't going to wait around to find out what they wanted. I loaded up my car and sped down the dirt road, leaving the farmhouse in my rearview mirror. I haven't been back since. I don't plan to. I was pulling another late night at the office, trying to catch up on a few reports I'd fallen behind on. It wasn't the first time. The place was dead quiet. Everyone had already left for the night, and I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights, the occasional creak of the old building settling. I liked working late because it gave me time to focus, no distractions, no one bothering me. It was around 11:30 when I first heard it. A knock on my office door. It was soft, like someone didn't want to make too much noise. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe one of the cleaners needed to get in. I was on the third floor, and most of the cleaning staff started with the lower levels. I got up, opened the door, and found a man standing there in a faded blue jumpsuit, holding a small toolbox. He looked like one of the maintenance guys, but I didn't recognize him. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice low. "I need to check the wiring in your office." Something about him felt off right away. His eyes didn't meet mine. They darted around, never settling. He was a little too calm, if that makes sense. Too relaxed for someone working so late. I hesitated, but I didn't have a reason to say no, so I stepped aside and let him in. He walked past me, straight to the corner of the room where the outlet was. He squatted down, opened his toolbox, and started fiddling with some wires, though he didn't seem to be doing much. I watched him for a minute, waiting for him to say something, but he didn't. "So, what's the problem?" I asked. He paused, looking over his shoulder at me, like he hadn't expected me to ask. "Just routine," he said, then went back to whatever he was doing. That's when I started getting a bad feeling. I glanced at my computer. I still had a lot of work left to do, but I couldn't focus with this guy in the room. Something wasn't sitting right. I didn't know the maintenance crew well, but I'd been working here long enough to recognize most of them by sight. This guy didn't look familiar. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly, like he was nervous or something. After a few minutes, he still hadn't said much else, and I was growing more uneasy by the second. "How long's this going to take?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but I was already thinking about how to get him out of the room. He stood up slowly, too slowly, and turned to face me. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was tight, forced, like he was holding something back. "It'll take as long as it needs to," he said. I didn't like that. Not one bit. "Maybe you should come back in the morning when everyone's here," I said, moving toward the door. I figured if I could get out into the hallway, I'd feel safer, maybe even call someone from security. The guy was creeping me out. But he didn't leave. He stayed where he was, blocking my way. "No need to wait," he said, his tone almost playful now. "I'm already here." My heart started racing. There was something wrong with this guy. I could feel it. Every instinct I had was telling me to get out of there. I glanced at the door again, but he noticed and took a step forward, closing the gap between us. "I just need a little more time," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You don't mind, do you?" I forced a smile, trying not to let him see how freaked out I was. "Actually, I do mind. I've got a lot of work to do, and you're making it hard to focus. So, if you don't mind, I'll ask you to leave." For a moment, he just stared at me. No expression on his face, just staring. Then, slowly, he turned back to his toolbox, but he didn't pick up any tools. Instead, he reached inside and pulled out a small metal object. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but then the light caught it, and I realized it was a switchblade. My stomach dropped. He flicked it open with a casual, practice motion, the blade glinting under the fluorescent lights. I felt my hands start to sweat. I backed up, hitting the edge of my desk, and glanced around the room. There was no other way out except for the door, and he was standing between me and it. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Just leave, okay? I won't tell anyone." But he wasn't listening. He took a step forward, and I realized I was out of options. I grabbed the first thing I could find on my desk, my stapler, and held it up like a weapon. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. "Stay back," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. "You really think that's going to stop me?" He lunged, and I barely had time to react. I swung the stapler, catching him on the arm, but it wasn't enough to slow him down. He grabbed me by the collar and shoved me against the wall, the knife hovering inches from my throat. I could feel the cold metal, could smell his sweat, his breath. I struggled, kicking out, trying to get him off me, but he was stronger than he looked. "You should have just let me finish my work," he whispered, his face inches from mine. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to knee him in the groin, hard enough that he let go of me. I scrambled away, knocking over my chair as I did. He doubled over, cursing, but I knew I didn't have much time. I bolted for the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I reached the stairwell. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I could hear footsteps behind me, fast and heavy, and I knew he was coming after me. I flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time, my mind racing with panic. I reached the ground floor and slammed into the security desk, gasping for breath. The guard looked up, startled, and I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. I just pointed back toward the stairs, hoping he'd understand. He grabbed his radio and called for backup, then ran toward the stairwell. I stayed where I was, too shaken to move. A few minutes later, I heard more footsteps, and two other guards appeared. They searched the building, but by the time they got to my office, the guy was gone. They didn't find him. No one knew who he was. There were no records of any maintenance work scheduled that night, no cameras on the third floor to catch him coming or going. It was like he'd never been there. But I knew better. He'd been there, and he hadn't come to check the wiring. I quit the next day, left the office, and never went back. Whatever that man had planned, I didn't want to be around to find out. I had been on the train for a couple of hours when I first noticed him. At first, it wasn't anything more than a feeling. You know when you can tell someone is looking at you, even if you haven't seen them? It felt like that, but I brushed it off. I was exhausted, hadn't slept much the night before, and was just trying to get through this long trip. I had to take this overnight train across the country because of some last-minute work thing, and all I wanted to do was sleep. I had my seat near the window, headphones in, trying to drown out the low hum of the train and the occasional murmur of passengers. It was when I shifted in my seat and glanced over my shoulder that I saw him. He was sitting one row back into the side, but his eyes were locked on me, unblinking. His face didn't move when our eyes met, not even a polite smile or a nod like you'd expect from someone you accidentally make eye contact with. He just kept staring, almost like he was studying me. I turned back around quickly, trying to shake off the unease. Maybe I was imagining it. People zone out all the time. Maybe he was just staring in my direction but wasn't really seeing me. But the longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I felt. It's hard to explain, but it wasn't just the staring, it was something about him. His presence. The way he seemed too still, like he was waiting for something. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling through pointless apps and checking the time every few minutes, but I could still feel his gaze on me. The train was moving fast now, cutting through some dark, remote area. The kind of place where, if something happened, no one would know for miles. I glanced outside, seeing nothing but the blur of trees and the occasional flash of lights from distant houses. The other passengers around me were mostly quiet, some sleeping, others buried in their books or phones. I felt alone, even though I was surrounded by people. After a while, I decided to check again. I twisted in my seat, pretending to stretch, and looked back. He hadn't moved. Same seat. Same expression. Same eyes fixed on me. This time, I noticed something else. His hands. They were gripping the edge of his seat tightly, knuckles white, like he was trying to keep himself from moving. It was unsettling, and my pulse started to quicken. I shifted again, trying to get comfortable, but it was no use. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I thought about switching seats or going to a different car, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, he hadn't done anything, not really. Just watched. But the watching was enough to make my skin crawl. I decided to get up, maybe stretch my legs or grab something to drink from the little vending area they had at the back of the car. I stood and glanced back again. This time, he was gone. His seat was empty. For a second, I felt relief wash over me, thinking he might have gotten off at the last stop or maybe just moved to a different car. But as I started walking toward the back, I saw him again. He was standing in the aisle, further down, just watching me. His eyes were following my every step, and I swear I saw the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. My stomach twisted into a knot. I didn't want to pass by him, but I didn't want to stay in my seat either. I kept walking, heart pounding in my chest, trying not to look directly at him as I passed. His eyes were dark, hollow almost, like there was nothing behind them. I hurried to the vending area and grabbed a bottle of water, using the excuse of taking my time picking something to avoid going back to my seat right away. I kept glancing down the aisle, hoping to see him gone, but he was still there, standing in the same spot, waiting. I couldn't stay back there forever, though. I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk back to my seat. As I got closer, he finally moved, stepping aside, letting me pass, but not without leaning in slightly, like he wanted to whisper something. His breath was warm, too close, and I could smell it stale, like he hadn't eaten or drank anything in days. He didn't say a word, though, just watched me as I sat back down. I was shaken now. I thought about telling someone, maybe one of the train staff, but what would I say? That some guy was staring at me? I doubted they'd do much about it. I put my headphones back in, but I couldn't focus on the music. I kept thinking about the way he was acting, the way he seemed to be waiting for something. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I noticed something that made my blood run cold. I'd seen this man before. I couldn't place it at first, but as I sat there, replaying everything in my head, it hit me. I'd seen him at the train station 2 days ago when I first started this trip. He'd been sitting on a bench just outside the entrance, watching people as they came and went. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I remembered his face, that same blank, unblinking stare. Panic set in. He'd been following me. This wasn't some random encounter. He'd been watching me for days, tracking my movements. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever was going to happen. I needed to get away, but the train wasn't stopping anytime soon. I was trapped. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking as I tried to think of someone to call. But who? And what would I even say? Hey, there's this guy on the train who's been following me for days. It sounded crazy. I felt crazy. But I couldn't ignore the fear building inside me. Something was going to happen. I could feel it. I glanced back again, and he was still there, sitting now, but still watching. His face was blank, but his eyes were full of something dark, something I didn't want to understand. The train kept moving, faster and faster through the night. I kept looking at the emergency exit, thinking about pulling the handle, but I knew it wouldn't do me any good. I was stuck. And he knew it. As we sped through the empty stretch of countryside, the train car seemed quieter than before. The hum of the engine was barely noticeable over the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. The other passengers were still there, but they felt distant, like I was in my own world, separated from everyone else. Just me and him. Finally, the train started to slow down as we approached the next station, a small stop in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my bag, heart racing, and made a split-second decision. I wasn't waiting for my intended stop. I was getting off here, no matter what. As soon as the train came to a halt, I jumped up and hurried down the aisle, not looking back to see if he was following. I stepped off the train onto the cold, empty platform, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I glanced around, half expecting to see him behind me, but he wasn't there. Not yet, at least. Without thinking, I started walking, heading toward the station's exit. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. But as I rounded the corner, I froze. He was there. Standing by the exit, waiting for me, his face still blank, his eyes still locked on mine. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him, before I finally turned and ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, not caring where I was going, just running, hoping to lose him in the dark. I never looked back. I didn't need to. I knew he was there, following, always watching. It was my third delivery of the night, nothing unusual, just another shift. I had been working as a pizza delivery driver for a while now, and I had seen my share of weird things, drunk customers, shady neighborhoods, and people who forgot they even ordered. It didn't faze me anymore. I just wanted to get in, drop off the pizza, and get out. This delivery was for a house I hadn't been to before, though. The address was out of the way, off a narrow road that stretched far past where the houses started thinning out. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes you get deliveries to those rural spots, people living out in the middle of nowhere, where the houses are spaced miles apart. I punched the address into my GPS, and it directed me down a gravel road that seemed like it led to nowhere. There weren't any other houses, no streetlights, just trees pressing in on both sides of the road. It took longer than I thought it would, but eventually, I saw the house. It wasn't much to look at, just a small, one-story place, barely lit. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows over the yard. The whole place gave off this feeling of abandonment, like no one had been living there for a while. But the order came from this address, so I didn't have a choice. I parked my car on the dirt patch in front and grabbed a pizza from the passenger seat. The air was heavy and still, no wind, no sounds, nothing. It was too quiet, and I started feeling uneasy, but I told myself it was just because it was late. I walked up the uneven path to the front door and knocked, waiting for someone to answer. No one did. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Pizza delivery." Still nothing. No sounds from inside, no footsteps, no voices, no TV noise, just silence. I figured maybe the customer didn't hear me, or maybe they were outside and hadn't realized I was there yet, so I waited for a minute. Then I knocked again. Nothing. I decided to leave the pizza on the porch and head back to my car. As I turned around to walk away, that's when I saw them. 3 men, all standing near the edge of the driveway, not too far from my car. They hadn't been there when I pulled up. I didn't hear them approach, didn't see them, and now they were just there, watching me. I froze for a second, not sure what to do. They were just standing there, staring at me, no expressions on their faces. One of them, the tallest one, took a step forward. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, almost like he was accusing me of something. I held up the pizza box, trying to stay calm. "Just delivering pizza," I said. I knocked, but no one answered. The man narrowed his eyes at me, not even glancing at the pizza in my hand. "Who told you to come here?" I paused, confused. Someone ordered it. It came through our system. The address is right here." I motioned toward the house, hoping they'd understand I was just doing my job. But they didn't move. The tallest guy looked at the others, and they all stepped closer. "No one's ordered anything from here," he said. His tone was cold, and now I could see the look on his face. He wasn't just suspicious, he was angry. "You spying on us or something?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "What?" "No, I'm just here to deliver pizza, man. That's all." One of the other guys, a stockier one, crossed his arms and sneered. "You expect us to believe that? You show up out of nowhere, and we're supposed to think it's just a coincidence?" At this point, I was getting really scared. Something was off about these guys, something more than just them being pissed about a random delivery. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing, and I could feel the sweat starting to form on the back of my neck. "I swear, I'm just delivering pizza. If this is a mistake, I'll leave." "No problem." But they didn't back off. The tall guy took another step toward me, now only a few feet away. "You think we're stupid?" he said. His voice had dropped to a whisper, but it was even more menacing that way. "No one's supposed to know about this place." I took a step back, glancing over at my car. It wasn't far, but the 3 of them were between me and it, blocking my way. I didn't know what to do. I thought about running, but I wasn't sure I'd make it before they grabbed me. "Look," I said, my voice shaking now. "I don't know what you think is going on, but I promise, I don't know anything. I don't even know where I am. I'm just following the GPS." The third guy, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "We've had people like you before," he said. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. "They always say the same thing." I didn't know what he meant, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I took another step back, trying to create some distance between us. "I'll just leave, okay? I won't bother you again." But they didn't let up. The tall guy shook his head slowly. "You're not going anywhere," he said. That was when I knew I had to make a run for it. I couldn't just stand there and let whatever was about to happen. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted toward my car, the pizza box flying out of my hand as I ran. I heard them shout behind me, their footsteps pounding the ground as they chased after me. I reached my car, fumbling for my keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps growing louder. I yanked open the car door and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and locking it just as they reached the car. They pounded on the windows, their faces twisted in anger, shouting things I couldn't even make out. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition, but after a few terrifying seconds, the engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, backing up as fast as I could, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. They were still pounding on the windows, their fists leaving smudges on the glass, but I didn't care. I threw the car into drive and sped down the gravel road, my heart racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, where the lights and people made me feel like I was safe again. I pulled over in a gas station parking lot, my hands still shaking as I tried to catch my breath. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them still following me, but there was nothing. I don't know who they were or what they thought I was doing there, but I've never been that scared in my life. I went camping alone last summer. I've done it before, and nothing bad ever happened. I like the peace and quiet, getting away from everything for a while. It's the only time I feel like I can really breathe. This time, I picked a spot at a small campground, not too far from the main road but still deep enough into the woods to feel cut off. I don't go to big campgrounds with a lot of people because it defeats the purpose. The whole reason I go is to get some time to myself. I got there in the afternoon and found a nice spot tucked back behind some trees. There were only a few other campers, and they were spread out, so I figured it'd be a quiet night. I set up my tent, got my little fire pit going, and started to relax as the sun began to set. It was warm, so I didn't need much to stay comfortable. Just me, the fire, and the sounds of the woods. I noticed the group around dusk. 3 guys, mid-30s, I'd guess. They showed up in a beat-up truck and started unloading their gear a couple of spots over. They were loud right from the start, laughing, swearing, talking way too loud for how empty the place was. I tried to ignore them, but it was hard not to notice. They had a cooler full of beer, and by the time they finished setting up, it was obvious they were already buzzed. At first, I wasn't too worried. People go camping to have fun, right? I figured they'd settle down after a while, maybe pass out after a few too many drinks. That's what usually happens with groups like that. But as the night went on, they didn't quiet down. In fact, they got louder. I was sitting by my fire, trying to read, but their voices were carrying over to my sight. I could hear every word, and some of the things they were saying weren't exactly polite. A lot of it was crude jokes, talking about women like they were objects, stuff like that. I tried to shake it off. They didn't know I was there, I thought. But then, I heard one of them say something that made me freeze. "Hey, looks like we got company. Check it out." I glanced up and saw one of the guys pointing in my direction. The fire at my side must have caught their eye. I wasn't exactly hidden, but I didn't think they'd notice me since I was keeping to myself. "Is she by herself?" another guy asked. I could hear the smirk in his voice even though I couldn't see his face clearly. I didn't answer. I didn't want to encourage anything. I hoped they'd just leave me alone, but that hope didn't last long. One of them, the biggest guy, stood up and started walking toward my campsite. I tensed up, gripping the book in my lap a little tighter, trying not to look as nervous as I felt. "Hey there," he called out, raising his beer in the air as he approached. "You camping alone?" I nodded, hoping that would be enough to make him turn around and go back. But he didn't. He stepped closer, standing just at the edge of my firelight, and I could see his face now. He was grinning, but it wasn't a friendly grin. There was something off about it, something that made my stomach twist. "You sure it's safe to be out here by yourself?" he asked. "You never know who you might run into." He laughed, but it wasn't a joke I found funny. I didn't respond, just kept my eyes on the fire, hoping he'd take the hint. Instead, the other two guys wandered over, bringing their beers with them. They didn't ask if they could join me. They just did, like they had every right to. The second guy, the one with the shaved head, plopped down on a log across from me and stared at me like I was some kind of amusement. "You're braver than most," he said. "Most women wouldn't camp alone. Too many creeps out here, you know?" The third guy, shorter and stockier than the others, stood off to the side, laughing under his breath like this whole thing was just a big joke to him. "Maybe she's waiting for someone," he said. "You waiting for someone to join you?" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My throat was dry, and I couldn't think of what to say. I knew I needed to stay calm, but every instinct was screaming at me that something was wrong. The way they were looking at me, the way they surrounded me, it wasn't friendly. They didn't care about being polite or even pretending to. "I'm fine," I finally managed to say. "Just here for some quiet time." The guy with the shaved head snorted. "Quiet time, huh? Not too quiet now, is it?" He looked at his buddies, and they all laughed. The big guy, the one who had first approached me, took a step closer. "You don't mind if we hang out, do you? Safety in numbers, right?" I wanted to tell them to leave, but I was scared. There were 3 of them, and I was alone. No one else was nearby, and even if I screamed, I didn't think anyone would hear me. My car was parked a little ways off, but getting to it would mean walking past them, and I didn't want to get that close. I forced a smile. "I'd really rather be alone," I said, my voice shaking a little. "It's been a long day." The big guy's grin faded, and his eyes narrowed. "That's so?" he said, his tone suddenly colder. "You sure about that?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I'd appreciate it." For a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me, like he was trying to decide what to do next. I could feel the tension in the air, like something bad was about to happen. The other 2 guys were watching him, waiting for him to make the call. Then, finally, he shrugged. "All right, whatever you say. We'll leave you alone." But as they started walking away, I could hear them muttering to each other, laughing quietly. I didn't feel any relief, though. I knew they weren't really gone. They'd be back. I sat by the fire for a while longer, trying to shake off the fear that was creeping up inside me. But it was no use. Every little sound made me jump, every crackle of the fire, every rustle in the trees. I kept glancing toward their campsite, but I couldn't see them anymore. The fire had died down, and their truck was parked in the shadows. I couldn't tell what they were up to, but I knew they were still there. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go into my tent and try to get some sleep, hoping they'd lose interest and leave me alone. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped up the tent, and lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the woods. It was too quiet. I couldn't relax. My mind kept replaying the way they looked at me, the way they surrounded me like I was some kind of prey. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I heard footsteps. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps were soft, but they were getting closer. I could hear them crunching on the gravel outside my tent, slow and deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just lay there, listening, praying that it was just an animal, that I was imagining things. But then, I heard voices. "Think she's asleep?" one of them whispered. "Let's find out," another voice said, followed by a low chuckle. I clenched my fists, my whole body tense. I knew it was them. They hadn't left. They were right outside my tent, and I had no idea what they were planning to do. My phone was in my bag, but it was too late to call for help now. If I made any noise, they'd know I was awake. For what felt like hours, I lay there, listening as they whispered to each other, their voices low but clear. They were talking about me, about how easy it would be to teach me a lesson for blowing them off. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay silent, to stay as still as possible. I couldn't let them know I was awake. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away. I waited, holding my breath, until I was sure they were gone. Only then did I let out a shaky breath, my whole body trembling with fear. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get out before they came back. As quietly as I could, I unzipped the tent and crawled out. The fire had died down to embers, casting just enough light for me to see the outline of their campsite. I couldn't see them, but I didn't care. I grabbed my car keys from my bag and crept toward my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I made it to the car without making a sound. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and slipped inside, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition, but I managed to start the car. I didn't even bother packing up my tent or the rest of my stuff. I just wanted to get out of there. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the distance, I could see the three of them standing by their truck, watching me leave. They weren't laughing anymore. I was coming back from a night out, nothing too crazy. Just a couple of drinks with some friends. It wasn't late by most standards, maybe around 11:30 p.m., but I was tired. I had enough for the night, and I just wanted to get home. My apartment wasn't far, about a 15-minute ride from where I was, so I figured I'd grab a taxi instead of dealing with the bus or waiting for a ride share. Seemed easier. I stepped out of the bar and spotted a taxi idling near the curb. I walked up to it, knocked on the passenger side window, and the driver nodded at me to get in. Nothing weird about him at first glance. Middle-aged guy, kind of scruffy, but you see all types driving taxis late at night. He had this old baseball cap pulled low, and he didn't say much when I got in, just asked where I was headed. I gave him my address, leaned back into the seat, and tried to relax. The bar wasn't in a sketchy area or anything, but the streets were empty, and the city always felt different at night. A little quieter, a little darker, especially on weekdays. We were driving for maybe 5 minutes when I noticed we passed a couple of landmarks that should have been on the opposite side of the street. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired and not paying attention. It was late, and sometimes I zone out when I've had a few drinks, but I wasn't drunk. I knew the area well enough to know when something didn't feel right. I looked up at the rearview mirror, and I could see his eyes glancing at me now and then, like he was checking to see if I'd noticed something. That's when I got the first real jolt of unease. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You took a wrong turn back there. You should have gone left on 8th. He didn't respond right away, just kept driving like he hadn't heard me. After a few seconds, he said, "Don't worry, I know a shortcut." I didn't like that. I didn't like the way he said it, too casual, like he was brushing me off. I sat up straighter, looking out the window. The streets were getting less familiar, more industrial. No stores, no houses, just warehouses and empty lots. "Ah, I'm pretty sure you're going the wrong way," I said, this time more insistent. That's when he started asking the questions. "You live around here?" he asked, his voice low and steady, like he was making conversation. But there was something off in the tone. Too interested. "Yeah, not far," I lied. "Just take me back to 8th, all right?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving, the silence stretching out between us. I was starting to feel trapped, like the inside of the taxi was shrinking around me. My heart was picking up speed, but I didn't want to show him I was scared. "What do you do for work?" he asked after a minute. The question hit me out of nowhere. It wasn't the kind of thing you ask someone you're driving home. It was too personal, too invasive. Like he was trying to size me up. "I work in an office," I said quickly. "Listen, can you just pull over? I'll walk from here." He didn't even acknowledge what I said, just kept asking more questions. "You live alone?" I didn't answer this time. I was done playing along. My hand moved to the door handle, but when I pulled it, it didn't budge. The door was locked, and there was no switch on my side to unlock it. I reached for my phone, but before I could even pull it out of my pocket, he spoke again, his voice harder this time. "Don't try anything stupid. I know where we're going." I felt a chill run through me. I looked out the window again, and the streets were completely deserted now. No cars, no lights, nothing. Just empty roads and the occasional abandoned building. I didn't know where we were, but it wasn't anywhere I'd been before. "Let me out," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice was shaky. "Now." He didn't even slow down. I could see his knuckles tightening on the steering wheel, his eyes flicking back and forth between the road and the rearview mirror, watching me. The way he was gripping the wheel, like he was trying to control something inside himself, it scared the hell out of me. "Calm down," he said, his voice too smooth, too controlled. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "You'll see." That was it. That was all he said. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was still in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out and make him notice. I glanced at the window, thinking maybe I could smash it, but the glass was thick, reinforced, probably bulletproof or something. I didn't stand a chance. I kept thinking I needed to stay calm, but my breathing was getting faster, my chest tightening up. I couldn't figure out why he was doing this, where he was taking me. The whole thing didn't make sense. None of it made sense. And then, he turned down a narrow alley, barely wide enough for the car to fit. The walls of the buildings on either side were closing in, and I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. There was no way out. I was trapped. The car stopped. I could hear the engine idling, the sound filling the cramped space. He didn't turn to look at me. He just sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. The silence was unbearable. "Get out," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. I didn't move. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't make myself move. I said, "Get out," he repeated, more forceful this time. He unlocked the doors, and the sound of the click made me jump. I looked at the door handle, my hand hovering over it, shaking. I didn't know what was on the other side of that door, but I knew staying in the car wasn't an option. I had to move. I opened the door slowly, stepping out into the alley. The air was thick and heavy, like it was weighing me down. My legs felt like jelly, barely able to support me. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings, but there was nothing familiar about the place. Just dark walls and shadows. The driver got out too, slamming his door shut. The sound echoed through the alley, making me flinch. He walked around the front of the car, stopping a few feet away from me, just watching me. His eyes were cold, calculating. He didn't say anything, just stood there, waiting. I didn't know what he wanted. I didn't know what he was planning to do next, and that was the worst part. The not knowing. My mind was spinning with all the horrible possibilities, but none of them seemed real. It was like I was stuck in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Then, out of nowhere, he smiled. A slow, sick smile that made my stomach turn. "Run," he said, almost laughing. "Go on. Run." I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I turned and bolted, my feet slipping on the wet pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to put as much distance between me and him as possible. I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady, unhurried. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. He knew the alley better than I did, knew I didn't stand a chance. I rounded a corner, my lungs burning, and stumbled into an open street. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were lights, street lights, and a gas station at the far end of the block. I sprinted toward it, the sound of his footsteps fading behind me. I burst through the doors of the gas station, gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The cashier looked up at me, confused, but I didn't have time to explain. I just collapsed against the counter, trying to catch my breath, my whole body shaking. "Call the police," I managed to say between gasps. The guy behind the counter stared at me for a moment before grabbing the phone. I glanced back at the door, expecting to see the driver standing there, but he was gone. The police showed up a few minutes later. I told them everything, every detail I could remember, but they didn't find the guy. The taxi wasn't registered to anyone, and the alley I'd run through didn't lead anywhere. It was a dead end. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run when I did. I don't like to think about it, but I haven't taken a taxi since. I decided to go camping alone because I needed to clear my head. Life had been getting to me lately, and I thought a few days by myself in the woods would help. I'd done it before, so I wasn't nervous or anything. It was a national forest, not the middle of nowhere. The plan was simple: hike a few miles in, set up camp, and just exist up there for a while. I parked my car at the trailhead, checked my gear, and started walking. The trail was nice, winding through thick trees with only the sound of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves around me. It felt good to get away from everything. The first few hours went by without a hitch. I passed a couple of other hikers coming the other way, exchanged nods, but otherwise, I was alone. That's how I liked it. Just me in the woods. It was about mid-afternoon when I noticed him for the first time. At least, I think it was him. I caught a glimpse of someone a little ways off the trail, moving in the same direction as me, but at a slower pace. It didn't seem strange at first. People go off trail all the time to explore. I figured he probably just looped back to the path further up, so I didn't think much of it. But then, after another mile or so, I saw him again. This time, he was closer, just off to the right, still moving parallel to the trail. He was wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low over his face, and he wasn't carrying much, just a small pack. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look, but he stayed hidden behind the trees. At that point, I felt a little uneasy. It wasn't normal for someone to keep pace with you like that off the trail. Maybe he didn't realize I was there, but still, something felt off. I kept walking, picking up my pace a little, but every now and then, I hear branches snapping or the sound of footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, but I never saw him again during the hike. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was there, just out of sight. By the time I reached the spot where I planned to set up camp, the sun was starting to dip below the trees. I chose a small clearing not far from a creek, close enough to have water but far enough from the main trail to feel secluded. It was perfect, or at least it should have been. I got my tent up, gathered some firewood, and started a small fire to cook dinner. As I sat there, eating my food, the unease from earlier came back. It was too quiet. Normally, you'd hear animals moving around or the wind in the trees, but it felt dead still. I kept glancing around the clearing, half expecting to see someone standing there watching me. But it was just me, or so I thought. When the sun fully set, and the fire was the only light around, I started to hear noises again. At first, it was just the occasional rustle, but then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking around the edge of the clearing. I froze, listening, straining my ears to figure out where they were coming from, but they stayed just outside the ring of firelight. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and shined it toward the sound. Nothing. Just trees and darkness. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but no one responded. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then started up again, moving in a circle around my camp, always just out of sight. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or something, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The steps were too heavy, too human. I tried to act normal, poking at the fire, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After a while, the footsteps stopped completely. The silence was worse. I kept my flashlight in my hand, scanning the trees, but I didn't see anything. Eventually, I convinced myself that whoever it was had moved on. Maybe it was just another hiker who didn't realize I was there and decided to go a different way. I didn't really believe that, but I needed to sleep, so I crawled into my tent, leaving the fire burning low outside. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to every little sound. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and for a while, that was all I could hear. Then, just as I was starting to doze off, I heard it again. Footsteps. But this time, they were closer. Much closer. I held my breath, lying completely still as the steps moved right up to the edge of my camp. I could hear the crackling of the fire, and just beyond that, the unmistakable sound of someone walking around. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. I reached for my flashlight again, but my hand was shaking. I didn't want to move, didn't want to let them know I was awake. The footsteps circled my tent, slow and deliberate, like they were waiting for something. I felt trapped. The thin nylon walls of the tent were all that separated me from whoever was out there, and I knew it wouldn't take much for them to rip through. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the footsteps stopped. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and my own breathing. I strained to hear anything, but there was nothing. I lay there for what felt like hours, too scared to move, too scared to sleep. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to rise. I crawled out of my tent, half expecting to find something or someone waiting for me, but the clearing was empty. The fire had burned down to embers, and the woods were quiet again. I packed up my camp as quickly as I could, my eyes constantly scanning the trees. I didn't see any sign of the person from the night before, no tracks, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I'd heard. I didn't imagine it. I started the hike back, moving faster than I had on the way in. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I heard a branch snap or leaves rustle, my heart would jump into my throat. But I never saw anyone. When I finally made it back to the trailhead, my car was the only one there. I threw my pack into the back seat, jumped in, and sped out of there without looking back. I haven't been camping since. I don't know who was out there that night, or what they wanted, but I know they were watching me. And I know they're still out there, somewhere, waiting for the next person to wander too far into their territory. I had the day off and thought I'd spend it at the park. It was quiet, middle of the week, so not many people were around. I liked the peace of it. Just some joggers, a couple of older folks walking their dogs, and parents with little kids at the playground. I was sitting on a bench, reading a book, nothing special, just something to kill time. I looked up from the pages after a while, and that's when I noticed her. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, sitting by herself on one of those springy animal rides, the kind that rock back and forth. She wasn't playing, though. She was just sitting there, staring at the ground. No one seemed to be paying attention to her. I figured her parents must be close by, but after a few minutes, I realized she was still alone. The other parents were further off, sitting in groups, chatting, or standing by their own kids. I scanned the area again, expecting to see someone watching her, but nobody was. Something about it felt wrong. I closed my book and watched her for a little longer, thinking maybe her parent or whoever was with her had just stepped away for a moment. But that moment kept stretching on. She wasn't playing, wasn't looking around like kids do when they're waiting for someone to come back. She was just sitting there, staring at nothing. I don't know why, but I couldn't let it go. It felt off, and it bothered me more the longer I sat there. Finally, I got up and walked over to her. I didn't want to scare her, so I approached slowly, trying to seem casual. "Hey, sweetie," I said, keeping my voice soft. "Are you waiting for someone?" She didn't respond at first, just kept staring down at the ground. I crouched down a little so I was closer to her eye level. "Is your mom or dad around?" I asked. Still nothing. She looked at me for a second, and her eyes were... I don't know how to describe it. They weren't scared, exactly. More like empty. Like she didn't know what to do or say. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, or maybe it was something else. I couldn't really tell. Her clothes looked a little too big for her, like she'd been dressed in hand-me-downs that didn't fit. I tried again. "Do you need help? Is someone with you?" That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I stood up quickly and turned around. A man was walking toward us from the other side of the park. He wasn't running, just walking, but there was something off about the way he moved. His eyes were locked on the girl, and he didn't even glance at me. "She's mine," he said as he got closer. His voice was flat, no emotion in it. He was wearing a faded hoodie and jeans, looking scruffy, like he hadn't shaved in a while. There was something about him that put me on edge immediately. He was too calm, too certain. The girl didn't react when he spoke. She didn't get up, didn't run to him like you'd expect a child to do when their parent shows up. She stayed still on the ride, just staring at the ground. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Is she with you?" The man didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his eyes hard and cold, like he didn't appreciate me being there. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, she's mine. We're leaving." But the girl didn't move. She didn't even acknowledge him. I glanced at her again, trying to read her, but she looked just as blank as before. I felt my stomach twist. Something wasn't right. I know people say you shouldn't get involved in situations like this, but everything about it felt wrong. The way he spoke, the way she was acting, none of it made sense. I tried again, more direct this time. "Are you her dad?" He glared at me. "Yeah. You got a problem?" There was something in his tone that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't prove anything was wrong, but I could feel it. I looked at the girl again, searching for some sign that she was okay with him, but she still wouldn't look up. I stepped back a little, giving him space, but I wasn't ready to walk away. "Do you need help?" I asked the girl directly. "Is this man your dad?" She didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. That's when the man grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firm enough to make me tense up. He pulled her off the ride and started walking away, dragging her along. She stumbled a little but didn't resist. She just let him pull her. I couldn't just stand there. "Wait," I said, stepping forward. "Are you sure she's okay?" He stopped and turned to face me. His expression was angry now, his eyes narrowed. I said, "She's mine. We're leaving. Stay out of it." My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to make things worse, but everything in me was screaming that something was wrong. I couldn't just let them walk away without saying something more. "I don't think she wants to go with you," I said, my voice shaking a little. The man's grip tightened on the girl's arm, and I saw her wince, just slightly. "Mind your own business," he said through clenched teeth. "This is my kid. You don't know what's going on." He started walking again, pulling the girl along. She glanced at me for the briefest second, and in that moment, I saw something in her eyes. Fear. It was quick, just a flicker, but it was there. She was afraid. I felt frozen. I didn't know what to do. I could follow them, but then what? Call the police? What if he really was her dad? I didn't want to make a scene if I was wrong, but that fear in her eyes, I couldn't ignore it. I took out my phone and pretended to check it, hoping he'd think I was backing off. But as soon as they were far enough away, I dialed 911. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what was happening, but my hands were shaking. "They're leaving the park," I said, watching them head toward the parking lot. "The man says she's his daughter, but something's not right." The girl looks terrified. "I don't think she's okay." The operator asked for details, where I was, what the man looked like. I gave them everything I could remember. I kept watching as they disappeared around a corner, my heart pounding in my chest. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then, the man and the girl were gone. I pointed them in the direction they'd gone, but it was like they vanished. The officers took my statement, asked if I was sure about what I'd seen. I told them I was, told them about the way the girl had looked, how she hadn't spoken, how she seemed afraid. They said they'd checked the area, but I could tell they weren't hopeful. Without more information, there wasn't much they could do. I watched them drive off, feeling sick to my stomach. I kept thinking about the girl's face, about that brief moment of fear in her eyes. I went home that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept wondering if I'd done enough, if I should have tried harder to stop them. What if she wasn't his daughter? What if something terrible happened to her because I didn't do more? I never heard anything more about it. No news, no reports, nothing. It was like they'd just disappeared. But I can't forget that look in her eyes. I can't forget how helpless I felt, standing there, watching them walk away. I still go to the park sometimes, but I'm always on edge now. I keep expecting to see them again, to see that man with another child, or worse, to never see them at all. I don't know what happened to that little girl, but I can't shake the feeling that something terrible happened after they left. I'll never know for sure, but I can't forget it. I just hope, wherever she is, that she's okay. But deep down, I know she's probably not. I was driving back from my parents' place, out in the middle of nowhere. You know those roads where you don't see anything but fields and trees for miles? That's where I was. I hadn't seen another car in over an hour, and my gas light came on, so I pulled up to this small gas station. It looked like it hadn't been updated in years, one of those old places with the pump that didn't even take cards, so you had to go inside to pay. The sun was starting to set, and the whole area was quiet. Too quiet, like the kind of silence that makes you feel uneasy. There was a beat-up truck parked on the side, but I didn't see anyone around at first. I got out of my car, walked up to the pump, and was about to start filling up when I noticed a man leaning against the side of the station, just kind of lurking there. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, staring in my direction. I tried not to make eye contact and just focus on getting the gas, but the feeling of him watching me made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself that it was fine, just some guy hanging around. It was a public place, right? People do weird things. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I went inside the little shop to pay. The guy behind the counter barely looked at me. I paid in cash, then hurried back to my car. When I stepped back outside, the man had moved closer, standing near the edge of the parking lot now. His eyes were locked on me, and he wasn't trying to hide it. I pretended not to see him and went to start pumping my gas. As soon as I did, I heard footsteps coming toward me. I didn't look up, just kept my head down, hoping he'd keep walking. But he didn't. He came right up next to me, standing way too close for comfort. "You need help with that?" he asked. I jumped a little, startled by how close he was. "No, I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. I tried to sound casual, but I could feel my heart starting to race. I just wanted to get out of there. He didn't move. Just stood there, staring at me. "You sure? Looks like you could use a hand." I glanced at him quickly. He was taller than me, scruffy, maybe in his late 30s. His clothes were dirty, like he'd been working outside all day, and his breath smelled like cigarettes. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and that made me even more nervous. I said, "I'm fine," I repeated, a little more firmly this time. I forced a smile, trying to stay polite, but my stomach was in knots. I focused on the gas pump, willing it to fill faster. But he didn't back off. He leaned in closer, like he was trying to see what I was doing, even though it was just me filling up the tank. "You know," he said, "it's not safe out here. You shouldn't be traveling alone." My grip tightened on the pump handle. "I'm not alone," I lied, hoping he'd get the hint. "I'm meeting someone just up the road." He tilted his head, giving me this look like he knew I was lying. "Really? Don't see too many cars around here. Place is pretty dead." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I didn't know what to say, so I just kept pumping gas, trying to ignore him. Every second felt longer than the last. I could feel his eyes on me, watching every move I made. "You know," he said after a minute, "I could follow you, make sure you get where you're going safe." That did it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. "No thanks," I said, quickly pulling the pump out of my car, even though it wasn't full yet. "I'm good." I moved to get back in my car, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my way. "Come on, no need to be rude. Just trying to help out a pretty girl like you." I took a step back, my mind racing. I didn't want to show how scared I was, but my hands were shaking, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. "I said I don't need help," I snapped, louder this time. He didn't move, didn't back down. Just stood there, staring at me with that same creepy smile. "You sure about that?" His voice was low, almost a whisper now. I glanced toward the station, hoping maybe the guy inside would notice something was wrong, but the windows were dark, and I couldn't see anyone. It felt like I was completely alone out there, just me and this guy. "I'm sure," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "I need to go now." I stepped around him, reaching for my car door, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip tight. "Hey, don't be like that," he said, his voice still too calm, too casual for what was happening. "Just trying to be friendly." I yanked my arm back, my heart racing now. "Let go of me." I shouted, louder than I meant to, but I didn't care. I wanted him to know I wasn't playing along anymore. For a split second, he looked surprised, like he didn't expect me to fight back. But then his expression changed, and his smile faded. His eyes went cold, and for a moment, I thought he might actually try to do something worse. But then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared from down the road, cutting through the fading light. A car was pulling into the gas station. The man let go of me, stepping back quickly, like he didn't want to be caught. I didn't waste a second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely turn the key, but I managed to get the car moving. As I sped out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man standing there, just watching me drive away. I didn't stop driving until I was miles down the road, my heart still racing. I kept looking in the mirror, half expecting to see his truck following me, but he was gone. I pulled over eventually, just to catch my breath and try to calm down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I don't know what that guy wanted, but I don't think it was just to help. Something about him wasn't right, and I can't shake the feeling that if that car hadn't shown up when it did, things would have gone a lot worse. I haven't stopped at a gas station like that since. I stick to well-lit places, crowded areas, anywhere with people around. I keep thinking about that moment when he grabbed my wrist, about how fast everything can go from normal to terrifying. I'm just glad I got out of there when I did. It started on a Tuesday. I had just gotten home from work, tired and ready to relax, when I saw a package sitting on my doorstep. I didn't think much of it at first, just assumed it was something I'd ordered online. I'd been waiting on a new set of headphones, so it made sense. But when I picked it up and looked at the label, I saw it wasn't addressed to me. The name on it was Daniel Marks. I didn't know anyone by that name, and it didn't even have my address on it, just the same street name but a different number. Maybe it got delivered to the wrong place, I thought. No big deal. I figured I'd be nice and drop it off at the correct address on my way to work the next morning. But when I got inside and sat down with the package, something felt off. The box was heavy, heavier than it looked. I don't know why, but my curiosity got the better of me. I know I shouldn't have, but I opened it. Inside, there was just one thing, an old, dirty brick. I stared at it for a minute, trying to make sense of it. Why would someone send a brick? There was no note, no packaging slip, nothing. Just a brick sitting in the middle of the box. I laughed a little, thinking it was some kind of weird prank or mistake. Maybe this Daniel Marks guy ordered something, and the seller sent him a brick by accident. But it didn't feel like a joke. It was too strange, too unsettling, especially since it ended up at my door instead of his. I should have closed the box right then, taped it up, and taken it to the right address. But I didn't. I just put it aside and tried to forget about it. I wasn't about to go wandering around the neighborhood at night for a stranger's package. The next day, I left for work without thinking about it. The package stayed in the living room, just sitting there on the floor. By the time I got home, I'd almost forgotten about it. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so it caught me off guard. I looked through the peephole and saw two men standing outside, both wearing dark jackets. They looked normal enough, but something about the way they were standing, side by side, made me nervous. I opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping the chain on the door. The man closest to the door spoke first. He had a deep voice, calm but cold. "We're looking for a package that was delivered here by mistake. It's addressed to Daniel Marks." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Yeah," I said slowly. "It got delivered to the wrong address. I was going to bring it over tomorrow." The second man, who hadn't said anything yet, stepped a little closer. "Did you open it?" His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know why, but the way he asked it sent a wave of panic through me. I didn't answer right away, and that seemed to make him tense. "Did you open it?" he repeated, more forcefully this time. I stammered, trying to figure out what to say. I didn't mean to. I was confused. "There's a brick in there." The first man glanced at the second, and then they both looked at me, their expressions unreadable. "That's not your concern," the first man said, his voice flat. "We need it back. Now." I nodded quickly. "Yeah, sure. I'll get it." I shut the door and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking as I went to grab the box from the living room. I was starting to regret opening it, feeling like I'd gotten myself into something I didn't understand. I just wanted to give it back and be done with it. But when I came back to the door with the box, I stopped in my tracks. The men weren't outside anymore. I peered through the peephole, but the porch was empty. The uneasy feeling in my gut turned into full-blown fear. Why would they leave without the package? I opened the door a crack, looking around the dark street. There was no sign of them. Maybe they'd gone back to their car, but I hadn't heard any engine start. I waited a minute, then two, but still nothing. So, I shut the door again, locked it, and put the package down by the front door. That's when I heard a faint scratching sound coming from one of the windows on the side of the house. I froze. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. It was like someone was scraping something against the glass, slowly, deliberately. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I crept toward the window, heart pounding in my chest. When I peeked through the curtains, I saw the second man standing there, just outside the window, staring right at me. His face was expressionless, cold, like he wasn't even human. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just kept staring. His hand was pressed against the glass, and his fingers were slowly dragging across the surface, making that horrible scratching noise. I stumbled back, panic setting in. What the hell did they want? Why hadn't they just taken the package? I ran to the front door and checked the lock again, then grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered, but before I could say anything, the line went dead. No static, no busy signal, just dead silence. I tried again, but it was the same thing. I had no service, which made no sense. I always had service at my house. I felt trapped. There was no way I was going outside, not with those two men lurking around. I grabbed a kitchen knife, just for some sense of security, and backed up into the hallway, where I could keep an eye on the front door and the window at the same time. For what felt like hours, I sat there, waiting for something to happen. The scratching stopped, but I could hear faint footsteps moving around outside, circling the house. They were taunting me, waiting for me to make a move. Then, without warning, the front door handle jiggled. My heart stopped. I stood up, gripping the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. The door didn't open, but the handle kept shaking, harder this time. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. I backed up, not knowing what to do. My only thought was to get out of the house, but how? They were out there, waiting. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. Everything went quiet. I didn't trust it, didn't believe they had left. I stayed put, heart racing, until I heard something even more terrifying. A whisper. From inside the house. "Just give it back," the voice said, soft and menacing. I spun around, my back to the door now, knife raised, but no one was there. The house was empty, just me. But the voice had come from inside, I was sure of it. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like there was no escape. Then I heard the whisper again, this time right behind me, and I bolted. I ran for the back door, threw it open, and didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street. I didn't look back, didn't think. I just ran. I didn't go back to the house for days. When I finally did, the package was gone. No sign of the men, no sign of anything being broken into. It was like they'd never been there at all. But I know what I heard. And I'll never open a package that's not mine again. I was driving back from a day trip, taking the long way home, when I saw the sign for a yard sale. It was a tiny, old house with a cluttered front yard. There was a mix of junk and old furniture scattered around, and I could see someone, an older woman, sitting in a chair by the front porch. I didn't need anything, but something made me slow down and pull over. I guess I thought it'd be fun to browse. I walked up to the yard, glancing at the stuff as I went. Mostly broken lamps, some dishes, things that looked like they'd been collecting dust for years. But on a small table near the edge of the porch, I saw a leather-bound photo album. It looked old, the kind of thing that might have some historical significance, like maybe it had pictures from decades ago. I picked it up, flipped it open. Inside were black and white photos of people, some looking like they were from the 1950s. I couldn't tell who they were, but they seemed like family pictures, smiling kids, women in old-fashioned dresses, men standing in front of cars. The old woman on the porch must have noticed me looking at the album because she stood up and slowly walked over. Her face was wrinkled, and she had this vacant, tired look in her eyes. She seemed harmless, maybe a little lonely. "That album," she said in a voice that was softer than I expected. "You should take it. Free. No charge." I felt a little uncomfortable. It wasn't that I really wanted it, I was just curious. Oh, I don't know, I said, trying to be polite. I was just looking. How much is it? No charge, she said again, a little more firmly this time. It's meant for you. Take it. Meant for me? That's when something felt off. Her insistence was strange. I looked at the album again, flipping through more pages, noticing that the photos started to get blurry, almost like some were overexposed. Faces were smudged, and there was something unsettling about how the eyes of the people seemed to stare out of the pictures. Still, I didn't want to be rude, so I smiled and nodded. All right, thanks, I said, closing the album. I figured I could leave it at home or donate it somewhere later. But as I started to turn away, the woman grabbed my arm. Her grip was tighter than I expected for someone her age. You need to keep it, she said, her voice dropping lower, almost like a warning. It's yours now. Don't leave it. I pulled my arm back, startled by her sudden change in tone. Okay, I'll keep it, I said quickly, trying to stay calm. Thanks. I headed back to my car, feeling the woman's eyes on me the whole way. When I looked back before getting in, she was still standing there, staring at me, her expression unreadable. I hurried into the car and tossed the album onto the passenger seat. The whole interaction had left me uneasy, and I just wanted to get away. I started the car and pulled out onto the road, glancing in the rearview mirror as I drove off. The woman was still standing in the yard, watching me leave. I kept telling myself she was just some old lady who didn't get many visitors. Maybe she was sad to see her belongings go, but something about the way she looked at me didn't feel right. I shook it off and kept driving. After a few miles, I glanced at the album again, sitting there on the seat. I thought about tossing it out, but I felt stupid. It was just a photo album. Nothing to get worked up over. That's when I noticed something in the rearview mirror, a car. It was an old, beat-up truck, moving slowly behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then it sped up, closing the distance between us. I couldn't make out who was driving, but I had a sinking feeling. The truck was following me. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. There were only a couple of roads in and out of that area. Maybe they were just going the same way. I turned onto a side street, hoping the truck would keep going, but it didn't. It followed me, sticking close behind. I felt my heart start to race. I sped up, making a few more turns, trying to lose it, but the truck stayed with me. That's when I realized who it was. I could just make out the silhouette of the driver. It was the old woman. How she'd gotten into a truck and followed me so fast, I had no idea, but I was sure it was her. Panic set in. Why was she following me? What did she want? I tried to think of what to do. I wasn't familiar with the area, and there weren't any other cars around. Just me and this old woman in a truck. I sped up again, taking random turns, hoping to lose her. But every time I thought I'd shaken her off, the truck would reappear in the rearview mirror, creeping closer. I didn't want to stop, didn't want to pull over, but I knew I couldn't keep driving forever. I had to do something. I pulled into a gas station, one of those small ones on the side of the road, hoping there'd be people around. I parked near the front, as close to the lights and the entrance as I could get. The truck pulled in right after me, parking a few spaces away. I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel, not sure what to do next. The old woman got out of the truck, moving slowly but with purpose. She walked toward me, her eyes fixed on the album sitting in my passenger seat. You need to keep it, she said, her voice loud enough for me to hear even with the windows up. I locked the doors, my hands trembling. I don't want it. I yelled through the glass. She didn't respond. She just kept walking closer, her expression calm, like she was in no rush. I felt trapped. I thought about driving off, but I didn't want her to follow me again. I didn't know how far she'd go, but I had a feeling she wouldn't stop until I gave in. She reached the car and tapped on the window, her eyes locked on mine. "You have to keep it," she said again, her voice lower this time, almost pleading. "You can't leave it behind." I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing, and I was on the verge of panic. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Some old woman is following me because I took a photo album? It sounded ridiculous, even in my head. But then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a knife, an old, rusted thing with a chipped blade. She held it up, just letting me see it through the window. She wasn't threatening me directly, but the message was clear. "I told you," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You need to keep it." I didn't wait any longer. I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching as I backed out of the parking lot and sped off down the road. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away from her. I kept driving, my hands shaking on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. The truck was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd find me again. That somehow, no matter where I went, she'd be there, waiting, with that same calm look in her eyes. I still have the album. It's sitting in my closet, hidden under a pile of old clothes. I can't bring myself to throw it away. I've thought about burning it, but I'm too afraid of what might happen if I do. I haven't seen her since that night, but I can't shake the feeling that she's still watching me, waiting for me to do something with it. It's like she passed something on to me, something I can't escape. I don't go on long drives anymore, and I definitely don't stop at yard sales.